Hey timeless sleep sapiens, tonight we slip out of the present and into a world so cold and raw you'll wonder how any of us survived, and you probably wouldn't. Picture it, your toes bite into icy ground, your breath clouds in front of you, and your bare skin tingles with every hungry gust of wind. There's no hoodie, no heated mattress pad, not even a sorry I forgot my jacket excuse. This is 22,000 years before your favorite pair of sweatpants. It's just you, a brain in survival mode, and the great cold outdoors. So will you freeze, or will you invent? Ready to discover how we survived the prehistoric wardrobe crisis? Grab your curiosity, because we're rewinding to the era when getting dressed was literally a matter of life and death. Would you have made it? Or would you have been Ice Age Popsicle number 130? I'm betting on Popsicle. But hey, surprise me. Tell us if you were dropped into 22,000 BCE. What's the first thing you'd try to use as clothing? And post your current location and local time, just so the mammoth spirits know where to find you. Good night, prehistoric trendsetter. Don't let the saber-tooth bugs bite. So, you're standing on a wind-blasted plain. It's the end of the last ice age, and the first thing you notice after the total lack of a drive-through latte is the way the cold makes every bit of exposed skin feel like a science experiment. Goosebumps don't even cover it. You can feel the sting along your arms, your chest, even your eyelids. The chill isn't that brisk feeling you get on a crisp autumn morning. It's the kind that gets into your marrow and dares you to do something about it. Look down. Your feet, unprotected, already going numb. Each breath in seems to sap a little more warmth from your body. There's no shelter except for the one you build, and nothing between you and the elements but your own ingenuity. Your stomach rumbles, your fingers stiffen, and you're realizing that what to wear is less about style and more about not dying in the next 12 hours. The wind picks up. You watch the clouds scud low over a landscape broken with rocks and the twisted skeletons of old trees. A flock of crows wheels overhead, so bundled in their own feathered parkas, you could almost be jealous. You see, right now, clothing isn't a luxury, it's a survival strategy, and it's a brand new one. As you huddle in the shadow of a boulder, trying to shrink the exposed surface area of your body. Not for nothing do we curl into balls when we're cold. Humans are like biological heat leaks, leaking precious warmth from every square inch of skin. Your body's top priority here and now is not fashion, not comfort, but keeping its core temperature in the tiny zone between alive and I really should have listened to Grandma. At first, you try moving to stay warm, hopping from foot to foot, hugging yourself tight, maybe even attempting some Ice Age jumping jacks. For about 5 seconds, this almost helps, but then the wind changes, and you're back to square one. That's when the primal voice in your head starts to get louder. Find something to put between you and this air, or you're toast. Well, ice toast. So you scan your surroundings, every sense tingling. The ground is scattered with the detritus of a million years, stones, branches, bones, feathers lost from birds now long gone. For a moment, you wonder if wrapping yourself in a layer of leaves might help. But then you remember, most leaves are gone this time of year. Plus, the ones left are about as insulating as wet cardboard. As you trudge through the scrub, you spot the tracks of a reindeer, big, deep and fresh. Your inner Paleolithic chef is interested, sure, but right now you're more focused on the thick, shaggy fur along the trail's edge. Could you get some of that for yourself? Without any actual tools, you're going to have to improvise. You spot a small, twisted bush with fibers tough enough to pull off in long, stringy strips. Not exactly a Balenciaga runway look, but in 22,000 BCE, no one's going to shame you for your DIY skills. Your brain, frost-nipped but still clever, starts running scenarios. What do the animals do? How do they stay warm? The answer's obvious. They come with built-in insulation. Unfortunately, you were born about 2 million years too early for a decent down jacket, but you do have hands and desperation. You try pressing your back against the bark of a tree, hoping to block some of the wind, but now your skin is scraped and stinging. Every solution seems to come with its own set of problems. Welcome to the first wardrobe malfunction in human history. You begin to wish you'd evolved just a little more fur, maybe a nice pelt of your own. No such luck. Instead, you hunch down, cupping your hands under your armpits, blowing on your fingers for a fleeting moment. You even consider crawling into a pile of animal dung for warmth. Hey, don't judge, you're a mammal in crisis. But trust me, the eau de Cro-Magnon scent doesn't catch on until much later. As dusk creeps across the sky, you realize the temperature is about to drop even further. You remember seeing the elders in your group huddle around the fire, skins and pelts draped over their shoulders. It hits you. To survive, you'll need to find or make something to cover your own skin. You mentally kick yourself for not paying more attention during Paleolithic home ec class. With a few hours of daylight left, you decide to scout for resources. Every movement burns calories you barely have, but the need for protection outweighs the need for rest. As you move, your teeth chattering louder than a group chat after midnight, you start to piece together a plan. It's a messy one, but every innovation has to start somewhere. Eventually, you spot something promising, the remains of a small animal, already half-eaten by scavengers, but enough fur is left to spark hope. You gag a little. This is not the era for picky eaters, but survival has always been the best motivator. You edge closer, picking up the fur with a stick, your nose wrinkling at the scent. Congratulations, you've just scored your first potential material for proto-clothing. Try not to think too hard about where it's been. Clutching your questionable trophy, you retreat to the safety of your group, if you have one, or a small hollow if you're alone. Your hands shake with cold and adrenaline. The fur is damp and slightly matted, but you can already feel the difference it makes when you drape it over your shoulders. It's not pretty, it's not clean, it's not even particularly warm, but it's better than nothing, and better than nothing is basically the height of fashion right now. You notice the others looking at you, a mix of envy and judgment in their eyes, but you're too busy not freezing to care. As the night deepens, you curl up, clutching the fur tighter, and make a silent vow. Tomorrow, you'll figure out how to do this better. Maybe you'll try drying the fur over a fire, or finding a way to tie it in place so it doesn't keep slipping off every time you move. Or, if you're feeling extra brave, you'll try scraping the flesh off with a sharp stone so it doesn't smell quite so much like death. For now, you shiver, you scheme, and you try not to think about the possibility of waking up as mammoth bait. You're a little less naked, a little more prepared, and a lot more motivated to make sure you don't end up in some future archaeologist's awkward bone pile display. Sleep comes in snatches, interrupted by cold drafts and the distant howls of hungry predators. You clutch the fur tighter, wishing you had more, wishing you had anything that felt like safety. The first step to inventing clothing is admitting you need it. Congratulations, you've just taken humanity's first step toward the world's longest-lasting trend. Tomorrow, you'll look around with new eyes. Every rock, every branch, every scrap of animal matter is now a potential solution, a way to build that all-important layer between your skin and the world's indifference. You're officially in the clothing business, and you didn't even have to sign up for a newsletter. And as you drift off, half frozen, half hopeful, one thought keeps returning. If you can figure out how to turn scraps into survival, you might just make it to see another sunrise. The first rays of morning sunlight burn through the mist, and you wake with the world's worst bedhead, pressed into a patch of cold earth, your fashion statement fur sticking to your cheek. Your mouth tastes like hunger and regret. The skin of your bare legs is mapped in tiny red goosebumps, and you swear your backside is flatter than ever. There's no snooze button here, just the blunt reminder that you need to do better, or you'll freeze to death faster than you can say prehistoric frostbite. First, your eyes fall on the thick, gnarled branches around you. Some are flexible, others splintered and tough. You tug on a low branch, testing its strength. The bark peels away in long, fibrous strips. Maybe you can braid these together, make something rope-like, or at the very least tie your cape in place so it stops blowing away every 5 minutes. Not exactly kosher, but again there are no judges on this runway, unless you count the pack of wolves watching you from the tray line, silently critiquing your style choices. So what's next? Resourcefulness. If you want to stay alive, you need to pay attention to everything around you, turning a landscape of obstacles into a living department store. Step 1. Inventory. What's actually available to work with? You start to look at the world the way an early human would. Everything is a potential solution, or at least an experiment. Now, plants. You scan the landscape, your senses sharpened by need. Some plants have thick, waxy leaves, others have stems you can bend without snapping. You rub your fingers over the rough surface, feeling for anything that doesn't disintegrate into mush at the slightest pull. Maybe you'll twist together long grasses, or layer big, broad leaves into a makeshift wrap. You find a bundle of reeds near a marshy patch. They're cold and damp, but they bend and twist surprisingly well. Animal bones, scattered in the grass, tell their own story: survival, death, and the leftovers nobody else wanted. You turn over a rib bone, noting its pointed end. With a little imagination, it becomes a piercing tool, a way to poke holes in something tough. The bones of small birds and rodents, still bearing the marks of sharp teeth, make you think, could feathers work? You pluck a few loose ones, tucking them into the folds of your fur. They tickle your neck, but it's another layer. You're onto something. Nearby, a pile of stones, some sharp, some smooth. You pocket the sharpest one, the prehistoric answer to a box cutter, and test it against a strip of bark. It works, sort of, until you nick your thumb and decide that safety gloves are a luxury for the far future. Still, you're learning everything you touch can be changed, if you're determined or desperate enough. Then there's the animal matter itself. Scavenging isn't glamorous. Let's be real, it's gross. But if a half-eaten carcass is what stands between you and hypothermia, you're not above getting your hands dirty. You eye a patch of rabbit fur, freshly plucked by some clever predator. It's sticky and a little smelly, but you wrap it around your wrist anyway. Congratulations, you've just invented the proto-mitten. Is it effective? Is it fashionable? Absolutely not. But it's another inch between you and the win. You keep moving, trying to ignore the primal itch that says you're being watched. Early humans didn't just survive by grabbing whatever they could, they learned to observe. You scan for animal tracks, droppings, anything that suggests what's been here, and what materials might be left behind. Bird nests, hidden in tree branches, are full of soft down, tiny feathers, and the odd scrap of moss. Maybe you can borrow a bit, without being pecked to death by the rightful owner. You crouch low, careful not to snap a twig, and extract a handful of fluff. Downy feathers are soft and insulate well. Your first thought, line your crude fur wrap with them. Your second thought, is this how allergies started? Too late, you sneeze, which is probably the loudest thing to happen on this continent all morning. You start the next day with a fresh resolve, cold, itchy, slightly more insulated, but still in desperate need of an upgrade. Today, you're focused on the real game-changer: animal hides and furs, the prehistoric equivalent of performance outerwear. At this point, you'd gladly trade your left foot. Don't worry, you're not that desperate yet, for anything that actually retains heat and doesn't fall apart the moment you move. Your first lesson in Ice Age fashion: animal skins are your lifeline. Without them, your chance of making it through the night is about as high as finding a Starbucks behind that glacial moraine. So, you head out, scanning for the remains of last night's scavenger feast, or, if you're feeling brave and maybe a little reckless, stalking something fresher. Let's be honest, hunting is a team sport, and solo ambushes rarely end well. But hey, desperate times. You stumble upon the remains of a deer, gnawed but not entirely stripped. The fur is thick, the hide still pliable. You mutter a silent thanks to the unknown predator that did the heavy lifting. The trick now is not just grabbing the pelt, but figuring out what to do with it. Animal hides are a little like that flat-pack furniture you never assembled. Intimidating at first, but indispensable once you get the hang of it. You take a sharp-edged stone and begin scraping away at the flesh, trying to avoid getting any on your already fragrant makeshift mittens. This is not a delicate job. It's messy, it stinks, and your stomach does a flip every time you find something slimy, but it's the first step to making the hide usable, and the effort instantly warms you up, if only from the exertion. You drag the hide back to your camp, passing a few others trying to solve the same problem. Some are working with smaller animal skins, rabbits, foxes, anything with a bit of fluff. You trade tips and a few sarcastic jabs. "Oh, lovely pelt. Did you get that at Sabertooth & Co?" You grin. Because in 22,000 BCE, fashion sense is measured in survival points, not likes. Back at your spot, you spread out the hide. Now comes the drying phase. If you skip this step, your coat will rot faster than you can say prehistoric mold. You lay it fur side down, stretching it over a flat rock, weighting the edges with stones. The wind and sun do most of the work, though you occasionally flip it, shooing away the curious beetles who see future buffet written all over it. While the hide dries, you practice the scraping technique. 1 part muscle, 1 part patience. You try to imagine the first human who ever thought to do this, driven by the same stubborn "I refuse to freeze" attitude. You try using a sharp bone too, noticing how its curved edge peels away sinew more efficiently. Slowly, the hide becomes more flexible and less disgusting. This is as close to a spa day as you'll ever get out here. Sometimes you notice patterns. Certain animals provide better insulation, others shed water more easily. Some, let's face it, just look cooler. If you're lucky, you'll get a wolf pelt with the fur still thick and glossy. Now you're not just surviving, you're making a statement, and nothing says "I mean business" like wearing the skin of a former predator. Once your hide is dry and scraped, you start to think about how to actually wear it. Draping it over your shoulders is the simplest method, but it slips off with every move, and the cold air finds every gap. So you try cutting holes for your arms. Awkward, uneven, but functional. Suddenly you've invented the world's earliest poncho. If you're working with smaller pelts, you have to get creative. 2 rabbit skins stitched together make a kind of muff. Fox pelts, once cleaned, wrap nicely around your neck. You marvel at how quickly necessity becomes innovation, even if your handiwork looks like it was designed by a sleep-deprived raccoon. Now let's talk fur versus leather. Fur is for warmth. Leather, the result of removing the fur and treating the hide, is tougher and better for protection, but not as snugly. You notice some in your group scraping off the hair and rubbing the hide with animal fat or brains. Yes, you read that right. Brains. Turns out those ancient conditioners soften the leather and keep it from going stiff and cracking. You try it, pinching your nose, and find it works shockingly well. It's official. The world's first skincare routine doubles as a clothing hack. You also notice other uses for hides. Makeshift bags, pouches, ground cloths, even shelter. One clever ancestor strings up a hide between branches for a windbreak, and you immediately file that away for your next camping trip, if you ever get unfrozen. But back to your wardrobe. You try lacing strips of rawhide together, pulling the edges tight to form a crude tube. Step into it, and voila, you've invented the proto-skirt. It chafes like you wouldn't believe, but at least it doesn't blow away in the wind. You experiment with thongs of hide, tying your furs in place, layering smaller scraps for extra warmth, layering not just for Instagram influencers, but for prehistoric survivors too. After a while, you notice something else: the smell. Ancient clothing is, frankly, an olfactory experience. A perfume called Odor Wet Dog, with notes of swamp and panic. You get used to it though. It's not like anyone is coming over to critique your hygiene. Still, you dream of a world where laundry is more than shaking out the bugs. And as you look around at your fellow survivors, you realize everyone is improvising, adapting. Some are better at scraping, others at cutting or drying. You pick up tricks just by watching how to stretch a hide so it dries flat, how to drape it to shield your chest, how to wrap your feet to avoid frostbite. Community is everything, even when it smells like a petting zoo in July. By sundown, your skin is warmer, your mind buzzing with possibilities. Hides and furs are no longer just animal leftovers. They're lifelines, status symbols, badges of ingenuity. You watch the flames flicker across a row of bundled forms, each person wrapped in their own patchwork solution, and realize this is the moment humanity stopped being at the mercy of nature and started fighting back, with style, if not with grace. You settle into your nest of fur and fiber, comforted by the scratchy warmth. Tomorrow, you'll figure out how to make these clothes stay put, how to cut them without ruining them, how to use every scrap. But tonight, you've got insulation, you've got innovation, and against all odds, you've got a little hope. That's more than you had yesterday. You awake, not quite refreshed, but at least not shivering uncontrollably. A minor miracle, considering your sleeping bag is a patchwork of scavenged furs and half-dried hides. Your entire existence revolves around the quest for comfort, but comfort in this era is measured in degrees above freezing. Today's priority figuring out how to actually make these animal skins do what you want, not just drape around you like a discount Halloween costume. Step 1. Tools. You're done clawing at things with your fingernails, and honestly, they're more ragged than a saber-toothed dental records. The world around you is packed with sharp stones, pointed sticks, and animal bones, left behind from nature's earlier fashion experiments. The first thing you need is something to cut and shape your material, and maybe, just maybe, make a hole or two that isn't a result of a moth infestation. You start by searching for the right stones, flakes of flint or obsidian that split into razor-sharp shards. You find a likely candidate, glinting in the morning light, and test it against a strip of hide. The edge slices through surprisingly well, and with a few determined scrapes, you fashion the Paleolithic equivalent of scissors. The sound is satisfying, a gritty rasp, the promise of progress. You cut your hide into a rough rectangle, then experiment with armholes. It's not pretty, but it's a step up from the caveman toga look. Now you need something to punch holes. Enter the bone awl, possibly humanity's first sewing needle, if you don't count your own bony finger when you jab yourself by accident. You fish out a rib bone from last night's leftovers, snap it against a rock to sharpen one end, and suddenly you're in business. You press the awl through the hide. It takes muscle and a little cursing, but it works. Each time the bone punctures the skin, you're inventing a new kind of connection, a way to tie, lace, or eventually sew your materials together. Next you move on to scrapers. Scraping is the not-so-glamorous backbone of early fashion. Before you can wear a hide comfortably, you need to remove every bit of leftover flesh and fat. Left on, they'll rot, stink, and make you very unpopular at dinner. Using a sharp-edged stone, you scrape the inside of your latest acquisition, working until the surface is as clean and smooth as you can manage. This is tough, gritty work, and it turns your hands to leather long before your clothing gets there. Your group is working alongside you, each person focused on their own survival project. There's always a sense of competition, who can make the softest fur wrap, whose cloak holds together the longest, whose scraper can outscrape the rest. You joke about holding a Stone Age fashion week, but the only judges here are hunger and hypothermia, and let's face it, neither is known for mercy. Every tool you create is a revolution. The sharp stones let you shape hides into rectangles and strips. The bone awl gives you a way to make lacing holes. Scrapers let you turn a disgusting greasy pelt into something almost wearable. Sometimes you experiment using a fishbone, for example, or testing a piece of hard antler as a blade. Trial and error is your entire method, and sometimes error wins out. You break more tools than you finish, and there are moments when you wonder if prehistoric tantrums are a thing. Spoiler, they are. You watch as others develop their own tool-making routines. One person ties a rock to a sturdy stick, creating a primitive hammer for pounding fibers or breaking bones. Another shapes a long, thin sliver of bone into a rough needle, then threads a strip of sinew through the eye. Someone else sharpens a chunk of flint and manages to cut a thin strip from a dried hide, perfect for lacing up the sides of a cape. It's not long before you start looking at the world differently. Every animal bone is a potential awl or blade. Every rock has the potential to become a tool, if only you can imagine what it wants to be. This is where invention meets desperation. You can't afford to get attached to your tools because sooner or later you'll lose them, break them, or leave them behind in a panic as a predator comes sniffing.
Midday brings a breakthrough. You find a thin, curved rib bone, strong, pointed and perfect for poking holes. You scrape and sharpen the tip, test it on a spare piece of hide, and it slides through with a satisfying pop. You grin, ignoring the dirt under your nails, and make a mental note. Always save the good bones. You try to teach a younger member of your group the same technique, but their first attempt snaps the bone in half. You both laugh, then get back to work. Failure is just part of the apprenticeship. You look up, occasionally, scanning for threats. Even with the whole fashion designer thing happening, you can't forget your lunch on legs to half the continent. You notice movement in the grass. A fox darting after a rabbit. You make a mental note of where it disappears. Fox pelts are light, soft, and excellent for lining collars. The hunt never ends, even when you're off the clock. Later, you experiment with more complex tools. You use a rough stone to grind the edge of a bone awl, smoothing it so it slips more easily through thick hide. You discover that dipping the tip in animal fat helps it pass through stubborn material, a prehistoric WD-40. You see others using heated stones to soften tough hides, making them easier to cut and shape. Someone even tries pressing a hot stick against a strip of hide, discovering that a little scorch marks the material and keeps the edge from fraying. It's innovation by accident, and it works. As you develop your toolkit, you realize something. Early clothing is less about looking good and more about engineering. Everything you wear is held together by trial, error, and stubborn hope. There's no such thing as a finished product, just the best solution you could make before your fingers froze. The real revolution comes with the combination of tools. You cut a strip of hide with a flint blade, punch holes along the edges with your bone awl, and lace them together with twisted plant fibers. You pull the lacing tight, and suddenly your cloak fits better, doesn't flap open in the wind, and actually lets you move your arms. It's an aha moment, the first time you feel like you're winning against the elements, not just surviving. You show off your new cloak to the group, striking a pose that would make any influencer jealous. Someone throws a pine cone at you. Prehistoric applause. You all laugh, the kind of deep, giddy laugh that comes from not being quite as miserable as you were yesterday. But let's not get too romantic. Early tools are crude, breakable, and require constant maintenance. Your needle blunts quickly, your cutting stones chip and become useless, and the scrapers wear down to nothing. You spend half your time repairing or replacing tools, always searching for the next sharp edge or sturdy bone. Resourcefulness becomes your superpower, and your toolkit is never complete. Occasionally you see someone in the group try to take a shortcut, skipping the scraping, using a dull tool, or tying a cloak with a fraying vine. Without fail, their clothing falls apart at the worst possible moment in the middle of a rainstorm during a chase, or when they're trying to sleep. There's a lesson in every failure, and it's learned fast. In the evenings, you gather around the fire, comparing your day's work. Someone shows off a particularly sharp scraper, another brags about their double-stitched cape. There's competition, but also camaraderie. You share tricks, swap tools, and help each other when something just won't work. No one survives alone out here, and nothing builds friendships faster than a shared struggle against freezing to death. Sometimes you get creative just for the sake of it. You experiment with carving patterns into your bone awl, more for amusement than function. You chip a small flint blade into a crescent shape,
just to see if it cuts better. Occasionally, you wonder what future archaeologists will think when they find your avant-garde tools. Probably that you had way too much free time, which is hilarious, considering you spend every waking minute trying not to die. You also notice that the better your tools, the more time you save. With a sharp scraper, you can process a hide in half the time, freeing you up to find food, build shelter, or nap, the true luxury. With a bone awl, you can repair a ripped cloak before the cold sets in. Efficiency means survival, and survival means maybe, just maybe, you'll get to see another spring. Night falls, and as you tuck yourself into your pile of furs, you run your fingers over the tools you've made, stashed nearby in case of emergency. They're crude, clumsy, and a little bit magical. Each one is a promise that tomorrow you'll be better equipped, better protected, and maybe even a little warmer than you were today. For a moment you allow yourself to daydream. What if you could invent something even more effective? What if there's a way to join hides that doesn't involve endless lacing and tying? You're on the verge of the next big leap, even if you don't know it yet. But for now, your toolkit is your lifeline. Your hands are sore, and your mind is full of ideas. The invention of clothing isn't just about finding something to wear, it's about mastering your environment. One scraped hide, one sharpened bone, and one cold, determined morning at a time. The morning air bites less now, not because the Ice Age has taken pity on you, but because your layer of hides and furs clumsily stitched, patched and tied is finally beginning to work. Your feet are still a little numb, your nose is perpetually cold, but your body's core stays warmer. It's real progress. But there's still one glaring problem. Your proto-cape flaps open at every gust, your armholes gape, and every time you crouch, a cold draft finds a new route to your spine. The solution is obvious, but for a Paleolithic human, it's nothing short of genius. Sewing. You're not inventing sewing all at once. It's a slow, fumbling process, full of frustration, tangled threads, and more finger pricks than you'd ever admit. But necessity has a way of making you stubborn, and you soon realize that lacing, tying, or draping only gets you so far. You want sleeves that stay put, wraps that don't unravel, and clothing that actually fits the shape of your body. So, you start with the basics. What can you use to hold two pieces of hide together? Your earliest attempts are laughably crude. You try punching holes with your trusty bone awl, then threading strips of rawhide through them. The first time, the strip snaps. The second, the holes tear open. You consider just gluing everything together with tree sap, but the result is sticky, fragile, and less shelter and more prehistoric flytrap. You observe the animals again, as always your best teachers. You notice that birds build nests by weaving grass and twigs, and that spiders spin webs so fine they can snare a passing insect. You study your environment, searching for something with the right combination of flexibility and strength. Plant fibers are everywhere. Tall grasses, the inner bark of young saplings, even the tough threads from stinging nettles. The trick is to harvest, dry, and twist them together, creating the world's first thread. You work the fibers between your hands, rolling them back and forth until they start to bind together. It's tedious, but strangely satisfying, like spinning your own version of gold, except this gold is more likely to smell like compost than a fairy tale. Eventually, you get a usable length, strong enough to pull through a hide without snapping, but thin enough to tie a knot. If you're lucky, you spot the sinew, the tough elastic tissue running along animal muscles. Sinew is the thread of choice. Strong, stretchy, and available if you're willing to do the messy work of harvesting and cleaning it. You fashion a crude needle by grinding a sliver of bone to a point and carefully boring a hole through the thicker end. The first few attempts snap. You mutter curses that, in 22,000 BCE, probably count as high literature. Eventually, you manage a needle that won't break at the first sign of trouble. You thread it with your twisted fiber and take a deep, hopeful breath. You try joining two pieces of hide, poking the bone needle through a hole punched by your awl. It takes muscle and patience, But eventually the point pushes through. You pull the fibre taut, tying a knot at the end so it doesn't slip back out. With each stitch, you feel a small surge of triumph. Your stitches aren't even, wide, and occasionally veer off like a drunken reindeer. But they hold. For the first time, you can actually connect two pieces of hide in a way that doesn't require endless knots and prayers. At first, you keep it simple, joining two pelts together to create a larger wrap, sewing up the sides for a proto-cape. But soon your ambitions grow. Why stop at wraps? Why not make something that actually fits your body? You measure awkwardly by draping the hide over your shoulders and pinching the excess with your hands. You try on, take off, re-sew, and grumble as your stitches pop when you sit down too quickly. But progress is progress. Sometimes you enlist the help of a friend who tries not to laugh as you twirl, showing off your lopsided masterpiece. There's camaraderie here, and a fair amount of teasing. Nice stitching, oh mighty threadmaster. Did you get your training from a blind mammoth? But there's admiration too. Your clothes fit a little better, stay on a little longer, and best of all, actually keep the wind out. The group catches on. Soon, everyone's trying their hand at sewing, some with sinew, others with twisted plant fibers, a few with tough animal hair. The sound of bone needles popping through hide becomes a constant rhythm. You share tricks, how to twist fiber for more strength, how to use spit to smooth the end so it threads easier, how to tie off knots that won't slip apart. Every new discovery spreads quickly because when you're fighting the elements, everyone's on the same team. Sewing transforms your possibilities. Suddenly, you can make fitted sleeves that don't fall off your arms. You can add hoods by sewing together two smaller pelts. You invent leggings, awkward but effective, and laugh as you stumble the first few times you try to run in them. Kids start showing off their customizations. A fringe of feathers here, a strip of fur there, a secret pocket. Okay, it's just a fold, but it counts. The more you sew, the more you learn. Hides are tricky. Too dry, and they crack. Too wet, and your stitches pull right through. You learn to keep your materials just damp enough to work with, but not so soggy they stretch out of shape. Sinew must be scraped clean, dried, and then chewed to soften before you can use it. Yes, you get used to the taste eventually. Every step is a balance between patience and urgency, because winter is never far off and cold waits for no one. Your fingers are always sore, the pads toughening into little calluses. Sometimes you jab your palm with the bone needle and let out a yelp. No one laughs. Everyone's got matching puncture wounds. In the evenings, as you sit around the fire, you compare scars, joking about who will be the first to accidentally sew their clothes to their own thigh. You experiment with different stitches. The simplest is the running stitch. Up and down, in and out, quick and dirty. But you quickly notice it doesn't hold as well. You try overlapping stitches, looping the thread around the edge to keep the hide from tearing. Someone else invents a kind of crisscross stitch, which holds strong even if the thread breaks in one spot. Pretty soon your clothes are a patchwork of techniques, each improvement learned from experience and passed on to others. You also realize the limitations. Sewing thick hides takes strength. You often have to widen the holes with your awl before the needle will pass through. When your thread runs out, you learn to splice new pieces in, knotting them as tightly as you can. Sometimes your seam looks more like a tangle, but you don't care. Fashion is secondary to function. If it stays together through a night of wind and snow, you count it as a victory. You make mistakes. Oh, do you make mistakes? You sew the wrong sides together, creating an inside-out masterpiece. You forget to leave enough space for your head to fit through. You sew your leggings so tight you nearly lose circulation in your calves. Sometimes you have to rip out a whole row of stitches and start over, muttering the kind of curses that future generations will perfect. But the joy of success is unmatched. The first time you put on a properly sewn tunic, one that hugs your shoulders, stays in place, and keeps out the cold, you feel something like pride. For a fleeting moment, You're not just surviving, you're thriving. You show off your creation, the others nod approvingly, and someone jokes, "Now all you need are matching shoes." There's more than comfort here. There's identity. Your stitches, your choices of hide and thread, the way you patch and repair, all become a kind of signature. Other groups you encounter along the migration trails have their own techniques. Some use a different kind of stitch. Others favor certain animals for their pelts. You study each other, learn and sometimes trade materials. Your sturdy deer hide for their soft rabbit fur. Every encounter is a masterclass in innovation. As your clothing grows more complex, you begin to think in terms of parts, sleeves, hoods, pockets, and closures. You try fastening two sides with a simple toggle made from a carved stick or a bone. You invent a kind of button, a pebble tied onto a thong, pushed through a slit in the hide. Your proto-garments get easier to put on and take off, and you notice that you stay warmer for longer. You start to see the bigger picture. Sewing isn't just about holding hides together. It's about adaptation, planning ahead, and communicating knowledge across generations. You show a child how to punch holes with an awl, how to thread a needle, how to tie a knot that won't slip open when they're running from a saber tooth. You watch as the next generation makes fewer mistakes, sews a little straighter, and adds their own flair. Evenings become sewing circles. No tea, just determination. The fireside glow is the world's first craft light, illuminating tired hands and squinting eyes. You swap stories, laugh at disasters, and show off tiny victories. There's comfort in the rhythm. Poke, pull, tie, repeat. Clothing becomes more than just survival. It becomes a community project, a reason to gather and share. And let's not forget the small luxuries. Someone realizes you can stitch two small pelts together to make a pouch, a place to stash your favorite rock or a few leftover berries. Another crafts a tiny amulet's bag, sewn with extra care and hung around their neck. Not everything you sew is purely practical. Sometimes you just want something to make you smile. The more skilled you become, the more ambitious your ideas. You try making mittens, stitching together two rounded pieces of fur. They're bulky, awkward, and about as dexterous as wearing a pair of oven mitts. But they do keep your fingers from freezing off. You attempt a hat, sewing scraps into a rough dome and adding flaps that can tie under your chin. You laugh at the way you look, but you're warm, and that's all that matters. Your group begins to look like a tribe of survivors. Each person draped in their own combination of hides, stitched and patched, personalized in 100 small ways. When you meet other groups, there's a sense of pride. You've taken what the world threw at you and turned it into something that lasts. The invention of sewing marks a turning point. No longer do you simply scavenge and drape. Now you plan, you measure, you shape, and you improve. And it's not just your body that's transformed. With better fitting clothing, you can travel farther, hunt longer, and rest easier. You're less distracted by cold, better protected from scrapes and bites, and just a little bit more confident. The world is still dangerous, unpredictable, and harsh, but you have one more tool in your arsenal. Sometimes late at night, you run your hands over the seams of your clothes, feeling every bump and knot. You remember the learning curve, the failures and triumphs, and you realize the thread running through your clothing is the same thread that runs through every human who ever faced the elements and decided, not today. Your first real stitch is more than a moment of invention. It's the beginning of all the comfort, style, and personal expression that will eventually fill wardrobes across millennia. You won't live to see the runways of Paris, the mass-produced sweatpants, or the endless parade of fashion influencers, but in this moment, with your clumsy, beautiful stitches, you are the cutting edge. And that, in the Ice Age, is nothing short of a miracle. You wake up to the gentle snap of frost on your eyelashes and the smell of damp animal fur. Your new tunic, stitched, patched, and nearly worthy of a sleepy yawn, stays mostly in place as you sit up, but then you try to stand, and the whole thing slides sideways, threatening to expose one chilly shoulder to the unforgiving air. Here's the latest reality. Sewing helps, But the next evolutionary leap in prehistoric fashion is the art of fit, because nothing says future Ice Age popsicle like clothes that refuse to stay on when you actually move. You sigh and shuffle to a flat rock, your workbench. Today's experiment. How do you turn a collection of stitched animal skins into something that fits your body, moves when you move, and doesn't trip you the minute you try to outrun a startled deer? Welcome to Paleolithic tailoring, where the only mannequins are your own limbs, and the only pattern books are trial and error. First, you study your materials. Not all hides are equal. The thick winter coat from a reindeer is heavy and stiff, great for warmth, but about as flexible as a board. Rabbit skins are light and soft, but tear if you sneeze at them wrong. So you mix and match, layering tough over soft, trying to get the right blend of protection and comfort. You fold a strip of deer hide around your leg, marking the overlap with a piece of charcoal from last night's fire. Then you try wrapping your torso, tucking the edges under your arms, hoping for a little dignity and a lot less wind. You realize almost immediately, humans are not rectangles. Your hide, cut as a square, gapes at the neck, bunches at the waist, and pinches the shoulders. You try to pinch excess material and fold it over. Now you see why the invention of the belt was a historic moment, if only you had one. Instead, you make do with a long strip of sinew, twisting it until it's tight, tying it around your waist with a knot that would impress even the most grumpy scout leader. Belting solves some problems, but creates others. Your tunic now cinches at the waist, but puffs awkwardly at the hips, making you look and feel like a winter squash. You try tucking, folding and tying, hoping for something that stays put. Your arms remain chilly, so you experiment with sleeves. Here, the fun really begins. To make a sleeve, you drape a narrow strip of hide along your arm and attempt to stitch it to the tunic's shoulder. It's awkward. Your needle keeps slipping, and the hide bunches. You try again, this time getting a friend to help. Keep your arm straight, they say, as if you haven't spent your whole life fighting gravity and awkwardness. After a few tries, you manage a sleeve that at least stays attached. Is it stylish? Not even close. Is it functional? You'd like to think so, but your range of motion is now roughly that of a bundled-up toddler. This process, repeated again and again, becomes a new ritual. Everyone in your group experiments with fit, drape, and closure. Some favor simple wraps, tying their clothes at the shoulders and hips. Others try adding extra stitches under the arms to keep the wind out. There's a lot of trial and error. Sometimes your new improvement makes things worse, not better. You remember the time you stitched a cloak so tightly that you couldn't lift your arms above your head, or the time you tried to create a fitted skirt, only to find yourself waddling like a penguin when you walked. But little by little, you learn. The key is not perfection, but improvement. You cut neck holes that are just wide enough to slip over your head, then reinforce the edges with extra stitching to keep them from tearing. You start thinking in 3 dimensions, how a piece of hide needs to curve around your shoulders, how a sleeve should angle forward for easier movement, how a simple dart or fold can turn a floppy poncho into something resembling a shirt. Tying is a constant fallback. You use braided plant fibers as belts, lashings, and drawstrings. When you need extra security, you add toggles, knobs of bone or smoothed wood, push through slits in the hide to hold things in place. One day, you notice a fellow group member wearing a pair of leggings held up with an ingenious double twist of twisted sinew. They leap over a log, and miracle of miracles, the leggings stay on. You copy the idea, and before long, everyone is inventing new ways to keep their clothing in place. You joke that you're living through the great age of knots. You even invent a few new ones. The never come undone knot, which naturally comes undone at the worst moment. The emergency release knot, which can be yanked free when a wild boar gets too close. And the why is this so tight knot, which leaves impressive marks on your skin by the end of the day. The process of measuring is comically primitive. You use your hands, forearms, and the distance from nose to fingertip as rough guides. You eyeball everything, adjusting and readjusting, trimming here and adding there. Your clothing is rarely symmetrical, but it fits you, and that's what counts. Every improvement leads to another. You realize that draping and tying can only do so much. Sometimes you need to cut your hide into curves, not just squares. You experiment with piecing together smaller scraps, sewing them into larger shapes that better follow the contours of your body. Patchwork becomes both a necessity and an art, as every leftover bit of hide is stitched into place. Your group becomes a sewing circle and a fashion lab all in one. Everyone shows off their latest modifications. Cuffs to keep sleeves from slipping over hands, extra ties to prevent capes from blowing open, clever pockets for carrying stones, berries or a lucky charm. You marvel at the creativity. One child invents a way to tuck fur around their ankles, creating the first boot cuff. Another manages to add a decorative twist of plant fiber at the hem, a flourish that gets a chorus of admiring grunts from the group. You learn that fit isn't just about comfort or modesty. It's about survival. Clothing that clings too tightly limits movement, making you slow and vulnerable. Clothes that fit too loosely catch on branches or slip off at the worst moment. The perfect fit is a balance, and you get better at finding it with every experiment. Over time, new standards begin to emerge. Tunics are cut with wider necks and reinforced edges. Sleeves are attached with overlapping seams to allow for bending arms. Leggings are held up with double loops and tucked in at the ankles to avoid tripping or dragging in the mud. You notice that as soon as someone finds a small improvement, everyone else copies it. Survival of the fittest. But with hemlines, your camp becomes a living, breathing classroom, the world's first fashion think tank, with way more dirt and significantly fewer mirrors. Sometimes you gather at the edge of the river to see what works and what doesn't, all while washing out scraps of hide and plant fiber. Water is cold, but it helps to clean off yesterday's mistake. Your group holds impromptu fit contests. Who can squat the lowest without splitting their leggings? Who can sprint the fastest without losing a shoe? Who can carry the most wood in their new shoulder pouches? Every disaster is met with laughter and a new round of ideas. The spirit isn't about shaming failure, but celebrating cleverness. It's the earliest version of who wore it best, and if you trip and fall into the mud, at least you'll have a good story. The next breakthrough is learning to layer. You notice the cold is easier to handle when you wear several pieces, a soft inner lining, a thicker outer wrap, maybe even a fur cape thrown over your shoulders, like a badge of honor. Layering means you can shed a bit when the sun comes out, or add more as dusk falls. You experiment with tying underclothes tighter to your body, then draping heavier, looser pieces on top. It's not just practical, it gives you options. Your friends invent their own versions. Some wear sleeveless wraps under big outer ponchos. Others develop double layers for their feet, tying moss or grass inside their hide foot wraps for added insulation. Kids even start crafting little mittens, sometimes out of nothing more than 2 scraps of rabbit fur tied around their hands. For every awkwardly dressed adult, there's a child proudly parading a new invention, looking as fierce and as silly as only Ice Age kids can. Then there's the business of repair. Clothes don't last, especially when you're spending every day climbing, crawling, running and wrestling. You learn to carry a small kit, your best bone needle, a coil of sinew, a few spare ties. If you're smart, you patch holes before they become disasters. You watch for signs, an unraveling seam, a thinning patch at the knee, a tie about to snap. Repairs are never-ending, but they're a point of pride too. Each patch is a story, each fix another way you've refused to give up.
You get bolder with each improvement.
Someone tries joining 2 hides at a curve, discovering that a slight arch in the seam fits a shoulder or hip better. You try your hand at a gusset, a diamond-shaped patch stitched under the arm to give you more movement. It's fiddly work, but the difference is immediate. Now you can throw a spear, or more importantly, hug a friend, without your tunic splitting in 2. These small inventions feel like superpowers. Measuring and fitting, you realize, isn't just about your own body, it's about the people around you too. When a child outgrows their leggings, you unpick a seam and add a patch. When a group member is injured, you modify their clothes for easier movement or to accommodate a bandaged arm. You're not only making clothes for yourself, but for everyone you care about. Sometimes you guess at measurements, and sometimes you ask the other person to stand still while you drape, tuck, and pin with thorns or bits of twig. Patience is a virtue. A sense of humor is a survival trait. Then there are the times you really get it wrong. You sew a legging too tight, and it rips in spectacular fashion during a jump over a log. You make a tunic neck hole so wide that it turns into a makeshift skirt. You try to add decorative fringe, only to find it gets caught on every bush in the valley. Each mistake is met with groans, jokes, and sometimes a little prehistoric dance to shake off the embarrassment. Everyone has their stories, and everyone gets better, one embarrassing wardrobe malfunction at a time. You start noticing the influence of age, skill, and personality in how people fit and wear their clothes. The oldest members of the group favor simple, reliable cuts, nothing fancy, but everything practical. The younger ones push boundaries, trying new styles, daring new lengths, experimenting with asymmetry and dramatic draping. Some start marking their clothes with charcoal or ochre, drawing lines to help cut straighter, but then turning those lines into patterns when they don't wash out. What started as practicality slowly becomes self-expression. At times you sit quietly watching the wind ripple the clothes hung on branches to dry. You realize that every piece, every patch, every knot and tie is a step in a much bigger journey. 1,000 years from now, someone will still be tweaking fit, still cursing their needle, still finding pride in a perfectly patched elbow. Maybe future people will have better tools, softer hides, and less mud, but you suspect they'll still have the same moments of triumph when their clothes finally fit just right. All these adjustments, modifications, and experiments form the heart of early human clothing. But there's a practical side too. As your garments fit better, you notice you stay warmer. The wind is less likely to sneak in, your movements are smoother, and you don't spend half your day yanking sleeves back into place or retightening your belt. Tasks get easier, you can walk farther, hunt longer, and rest a little more comfortably at night. The difference is as clear as day. Clothes that fit save energy, time, and even lives. Sometimes you find yourself daydreaming. What would it be like if you had a way to measure, mark, and cut with perfect accuracy? If you could swap your bone awl for a shiny metal needle, your sinew for silk thread, your flint blade for a pair of scissors, the fantasy never lasts long. Your reality is rough, but it's also resourceful, endlessly creative, and deeply human. The struggle to fit is what makes you stronger. Your nights become calmer as your clothes improve. You settle into sleep faster, curled beneath your now reasonably fitted tunic and layered wraps. You dream of perfect fits and flawless stitches, and you wake to the comforting weight of your own handiwork. Each morning, you adjust, retie, and sometimes laugh at how lopsided you still look, but you know you're better prepared than the day before. When you look at your group, huddled around the fire in their patchwork creations, you see the subtle confidence that comes from surviving, adapting, and solving problems together. Each member, whether their clothing is a perfect fit or a bit wonky, carries themselves with the knowledge that they've wrestled nature and won, at least for today. As the season changes and days grow colder, you feel gratitude for every improvement, every careful measurement, every hard-earned lesson. Fitting your clothing isn't a luxury, it's a victory, a sign that, for one more day, you are a little less at the mercy of the wild, a little more master of your own fate. And somewhere deep down, you realize the drive to make things fit, your clothes, your life, your place in this vast, ancient world, is one of the oldest, most beautiful parts of being human. By now, you know the cold isn't the only enemy. As the days slip into weeks, you realize that your newly fitted, patched and painstakingly stitched wardrobe is more than a shield against freezing winds. It's your line of defense against all the other dangers nature throws at you. Sun that bakes the earth into a blinding glare, winds that can skin your face raw, thorny underbrush eager to leave its mark. Even the insect world, tiny, persistent, and perfectly happy to turn your bare skin into their buffet. You never thought about clothes as anything but a luxury until you see what happens without them. There's the memory of your first sunburn, skin searing red where your furs slipped aside, or that time you squatted too long in the grass and walked away covered in mosquito bites, itching until you wanted to trade your hide for a porcupine's. Your hands are tough, but your shins and forearms still sport scrapes and scabs from 1,000 small encounters with the wild. Suddenly, the idea of protection takes on a whole new urgency. You start to notice patterns. Days when the wind comes screaming down from the mountains, everyone wraps their hoods tighter and pulls sleeves over their hands. When the sun climbs high and there's nowhere to hide, the group drapes hides over their shoulders like cloaks, fashioning makeshift visors from tufts of fir or palm fronds. If you're caught without cover, you learn fast. One long day in the sun can leave your skin so tender you wince at the gentlest breeze. Children, especially, become test cases in the battle against the elements. Their skin is softer, more vulnerable. It's a daily contest to keep them wrapped and covered. You invent child-sized tunics, smaller hoods, mittens tied with grass to keep from losing them. The kids grumble and squirm, but you know every bit of protection makes a difference. You watch as the clever ones invent games with their clothes, tying belts into capes, playing mammoth hunter with hoods that slip down over their eyes, laughter echoing through the camp. The older folks, with their sun-leathered skin and scars from countless seasons, become your guides. They teach you to watch for early signs of frostbite, white patches on fingertips, numb toes inside wet shoes. You learn that covering your head with a double-layered fur cap can make the difference between a good night's sleep and hours of teeth-chattering misery. They share their wisdom about the natural world, the plant sap that soothes stings, the mud you can smear on a sunburn to cool and protect it. Every lesson is a patch in your mental cloak, another layer between you and disaster. You remember one particular morning, the air so dry, your lips crack with every word. You and a few others trek across open ground, the sun a white-hot disk above you. You pull your cape over your head, but your cheeks are exposed. By the time you return, your skin is raw and tight. That night, you rub animal fat over the sore spots, cursing yourself for not learning sooner. The next day, you tie a strip of hide around your face, leaving only your eyes exposed. Suddenly, you've invented the world's first face mask, a few thousand years ahead of the trend. Wind, too, is an ever-present threat. When it howls, you learn to tuck every loose end, tighten every knot. A flapping cloak can whip your skin raw in minutes, leaving red, stinging welts. You discover that doubling up layers over exposed joints, elbows, knees, ankles, adds crucial protection, not just from the cold, but from the sand and grit the wind hurls at you. After a long day, you look at the group and notice everyone has a slightly different solution. Extra padding at the shoulders for those who carry wood, thick knee patches for the hunters who crawl through the brush, hoods that tie tight against the chin for the sentries on the hilltop. You're not just keeping out the elements, you're blocking out the bites. Insects are relentless, especially when the air turns damp. Swarms rise from puddles, stinging and biting. At first, you swat and scratch, but soon you learn that covering up is far more effective. You pull your sleeves down, tie leggings tighter, and tuck every edge of hide under another. The group quickly adapts. Ankle wraps, wrist guards, even collars tied snugly to block out gnats and mosquitoes. A few clever hands fashion mesh-like panels from twisted grasses, layering them over open spots for extra protection. One evening, as you tend a smoky fire to drive off flies, you experiment with something new, a sticky paste from boiled tree resin. You smear it over the edges of your shoes, hoping it'll keep the ants out. It mostly succeeds, at least until you trip and end up with half the forest floor glued to your feet. The others laugh, but take notes. The next day, someone tries rubbing dried mint leaves and wild garlic onto their skin. It stinks, but the bugs seem less interested. Each attempt, successful or not, becomes another story around the fire. There are hazards you never expected. Sharp stones lurking beneath the snow, waiting to slice your feet if you step carelessly. Thorn bushes, eager to snag and tear at your leggings. Even the humble grass can cut your ankles, leaving tiny red lines if you run through it bare-legged. Clothing, you realize, is more than insulation, it's armor. You start reinforcing your leggings with extra patches at the shins. Your shoes, once a simple wrap, now get an added sole of bark or several layers of hide. You learn to repair them nightly, cursing each time you forget and end up with a stone in your heel the next morning. You adapt your clothes for the tasks of daily life. If you're out foraging, you tie your sleeves out of the way, keeping hands free for picking berries and digging roots. Hunters bind their leggings tight for silent movement through the brush. Gatherers add oversized pouches and straps to carry the day's finds. Children copy the adults, fashioning their own work clothes from scraps. The youngest invent an elaborate game: who can patch a tear the fastest, who can stuff the most moss into a shoe, who can tie the best bug-proof knot. With every hazard, the group finds a solution, a fix, or at least a decent joke. When someone tears a seam on a sharp branch, the story becomes legendary. Remember when you tried to outrun that rabbit and ended up mooning the whole camp? Laughter becomes part of the process, softening the daily grind and turning each mishap into a lesson. The daily fight for protection also has its darker moments. You learn to respect the danger of going without. One evening, a friend returns from a hunt, limping, a deep scratch on his leg from a hidden thorn. The wound festers. There's no such thing as antiseptic yet, and the group scrambles to help, wrapping the wound, applying poultices, and watching for fever. It's a grim reminder that the world isn't forgiving. Protection is not optional. It's a necessity for life.
Your solutions evolve with the seasons. As summer fades and cold returns, you add more layers, wrap your feet tighter, and pad your hoods with spare fur. In the spring, when insects rule, you switch to lighter, denser weaves, smearing yourself with sap and mud, anything to keep the bites at bay. When the sun is at its hottest, you seek out the lightest hides, wear them loose, and drape them over every bit of exposed skin.
You notice too that your attitude toward clothing is changing. No longer is it something you throw on at the last minute. Now you plan ahead. What will you face today? Will you need extra protection from thorns? Should you double up your foot wrap? Is there a chance of rain? And should you carry a spare hide for shelter? You start to feel a quiet pride in your preparations. The world may be wild, but you are not helpless. You become more attentive to your own needs. If your hands blister from chopping wood, you add an extra wrap around your palms, a crude but effective glove. If your neck sunburns from a long day outside, you tie a strip of rabbit fur around it, the soft lining soothing against your skin. You adjust, tweak, and customize. The process is never finished. You even find beauty in the effort. The group starts decorating practical patches with bits of colored clay or beads made from bone and shell. A shoulder pad might get an extra row of feathers, both for flair and to keep the rain from running down your back. Your friends invent ways to mark their clothes, an ochre line for every winter survived, a notch for every child born. Clothing becomes a record of your life, your triumphs and struggles, your ability to adapt and endure. Sometimes, in the rare moments of quiet, you catch yourself marveling at how much has changed. Once, you were shivering in a field, skin prickling from every breeze. Now you're bundled, layered, and if not completely comfortable, at least prepared. The wild is still dangerous, but it no longer feels quite so hostile. Your clothing, stitched and tied and constantly repaired, is your best defense, your greatest invention, your badge of membership in the club of the living. There are still disasters, of course. One afternoon, a sudden downpour leaves everyone soaked. Your hide wraps heavy and dripping. You shiver, but you know what to do. Strip the wettest layers, dry them by the fire, rub your skin with fat to keep the cold at bay. The group crowds close, sharing warmth, trading stories. The next day, you experiment with adding an outer layer of bark to your capes, hoping to shed water before it soaks through. It works mostly, if you don't mind smelling a bit like a woodland stew. Insect season returns with a vengeance. You spend an hour before bed picking ticks from your leggings, squashing fleas, and muttering about the world's tiniest monsters. Someone suggests burning leaves of a certain plant. The smoke drives away the worst of the bugs, but leaves your clothes smelling like roasted weeds. You decide it's a small price to pay. Your solutions, though never perfect, are always improving. Each year you survive a little better, a little longer. You wonder if the next generation will have an easier time, if they'll remember the tricks you invented, the knots you perfected, the way you doubled your leggings to keep the wind out and the bites off. You hope so. In the meantime, you patch another hole, tighten another knot, and thank the world for the simple miracle of clothing. The sun sets, the cold returns, and you settle by the fire. Wrapped in your patched, layered, bite-proof, sun-shielding, wind-busting garments, you listen to the howling outside. You know the world is still wild and merciless, but for tonight, at least you are safe, protected, and thanks to every scrap, stitch, and ingenious hack, a little more at home on the planet. Another frigid dawn. You roll over, feeling the familiar stiffness in your back, the ache in your fingers, 1 part cold, 2 parts relentless hand stitching. Someone is already poking at the fire, and you catch the scent of smoke and singed fur, the background aroma of prehistoric civilization. You sit up and look around, your groups, scattered like driftwood along the riverbank, bundled in patchwork layers. Here everyone's clothes are not just survival gear, they are social statements, and making them as quietly become the group's most important collaborative project. You used to think of clothing as something you made alone, grumbling over knots and muttering at snapped sinew. Now, as you wrap your sore hands around a warm cup of water, no coffee in 22,000 BCE, you realize it's become the focus of every group effort. The invention of clothing isn't just an act of self-preservation, it's the glue that knits your band together. You've discovered that when life is on the line, fashion is a team sport. It always begins with the hunt. The strongest and bravest. Sometimes that's you. Sometimes it's the quietest person in the group. Leave at first light, tracking game through snow or mud. When the catch is brought back, everyone pitches in. You don't just carve up meat for eating. You divvy out hide and fur, bone and sinew. Even the smallest children take part, scraping bits of flesh from the inside of a pelt, or picking burrs from clumps of hair. It's a communal choreography. Every piece is precious, and every hand has a job. There are the processors, the experts at scraping, cleaning, and drying hides. The strongest arms pull sinew into fine threads, pounding it between rocks until it's ready to be twisted and spooled. Someone with an eye for detail sets aside the softest rabbit pelts for linings, the thickest reindeer hides for outer wraps, and the most flexible tendons for sewing. Your group learns who's best at each job, but nobody is too proud to take a lesson from someone younger or older. Everyone rotates tasks, learns new skills, and shares techniques for softening, stretching, or patching. After processing, the real magic begins. You and your group gather in a rough circle, huddled against the wind. Bone needles and awls are shared. Sinew is parceled out, and piles of fur and hide are sorted. The scene is surprisingly familiar. A sewing circle full of laughter, arguments, and the world's earliest fashion critiques. You teach and you learn. Someone shows you how to make tighter, more even stitches. You demonstrate your latest way to reinforce elbows and knees. An elder tells stories about the old days, how they once spent an entire season with a single, ever-shrinking cloak because no one could agree on who got the best scraps. Another group member invents a double lacing technique, showing it off with mock pride and getting applause, and a few jokes from the rest. The process is never silent. Jokes fly as quickly as bone needles. Nice patchwork planning to audition for the world's first scarecrow? At least my tunic doesn't fall off every time I sneeze. There's a lot of gentle teasing, but just as much encouragement. When someone's garment turns out especially well fitted or clever, The group claps them on the back and takes mental notes. Imitation is flattery, but it's also smart when something works. Everyone wants it. Not all work is done around the fire. Some days, you split into pairs or trios, wandering the riverbank for reeds, bark, and new types of plant fiber. Someone discovers a new grass that twists into a surprisingly strong cord. Another finds that soaking certain vines overnight makes them easier to braid. Your world expands as you share discoveries and debate the merits of different materials. The forest and field become your marketplace, every corner full of potential. When a big project is underway, maybe a new cloak for the eldest, or a group effort to outfit a child who's outgrown every pair of leggings, everyone helps. One person holds the hide taut, another sews, a third ties off loose ends or smooth wrinkles. You share tools, materials, and occasionally the frustration of a seam that won't stay straight. The laughter that follows is a balm against the wind. You call that a straight line. Looks more like you were chasing a squirrel. The victim rolls their eyes but smiles, knowing the garment will be better for all the hands that touched it. In the evenings, as the sky turns purple and the fire burns low, you listen to stories about the old winters, legendary hunts, and the ancestor who supposedly invented the first hood by accident. Something about a bear, a near miss, and a pelt that got stuck. You realize that every garment is also a story, a patchwork of memory and skill. The group doesn't just make clothes, it passes on knowledge, weaving it into every seam. There's something else, too, a growing sense of pride. When you leave camp to visit another band, you immediately notice the differences in their clothing. Some groups favor furs with the hair left on, others go for soft tanned leather. You see different techniques for stitching, fastening, and layering. Occasionally, you trade your extra strong sinew thread for their supple rabbit pelts, your double-laced belt for their clever hide pouch. The exchange is practical, but it's also a show of skill, respect, and curiosity. You swap stories about the best way to keep out the wind, the quickest patch for a ripped tunic, the worst disaster involving sap, smoke, and an irreplaceable fur. These encounters are your window into a bigger world. You realize that clothing is more than warmth and modesty. It's an early language, a way to show who you are, where you're from, how you live, and what you value. The best clothing is not just made well, it's made together. Some of your fondest memories come from the group's mishaps, like the night the wind whipped through camp and everyone's capes tried to take flight, leaving you all chasing runaway clothing in the moonlight, or the time you all tried to invent rainproof hats by stretching hide over woven reeds, only to discover that the hats turned into tiny swimming pools after the first downpour. The sight of everyone sloshing around, dumping water out of their inventions is enough to keep you laughing for days. But group effort is serious business too. When someone is sick or injured, the group rallies to create special wraps, slings, or soft padding. You adapt designs to accommodate a broken arm or a twisted ankle. When a new baby arrives, everyone contributes scraps to create the softest, warmest bundle possible. Clothing is your medicine, your shield, your collective embrace. As the seasons change, you plan together. Before the first frost, the group gathers every spare hide, laying them out, checking for holes, debating which scraps to use for mittens, which to patch shoes. You assign tasks. A few will hunt, others will gather moss and grasses for insulation, the rest will sit by the fire, repairing and reinforcing. You've become experts at triage, knowing which repairs can wait, which must be done immediately. Each winter, you're a little more prepared, a little more organized, a little less vulnerable. Even disagreements have their place. There are squabbles over the best stitch, the right way to clean a pelt, the most efficient knot. Sometimes, you give up and let two group members duel it out, each finishing a garment their way, then letting the harsh weather decide which survives. Loser buys dinner, usually by cooking, since money is about 20,000 years in the future. Your group effort stretches beyond clothing itself. When a sudden storm hits, you work together to build a shelter, using the biggest hides for the roof, weighing down the corners with stones, plugging gaps with moss and bark. You're quick, efficient, a human assembly line with no manual, no instruction except the will to survive. Even children contribute, learning by watching and imitating. The youngest invent new games. Who can thread the most beads onto a tie? Who can make the smallest stitches? Who can find the softest moss? They wear their practice clothes with pride, showing off each new patch, each new trick. The joy on their faces as they learn, muddled with the pride of the adults, makes the whole camp warmer, if only in spirit. Your group develops little rituals. Before a new project, someone cracks a joke or leads a song, something rhythmic to keep spirits high and hands moving. If a garment turns out especially well, the maker gets to wear it around the fire, strutting and twirling to appreciative hoots and hollers. When a patch job saves someone from frostbite, the group celebrates with an extra helping of food, or maybe a special ornament sewn onto the hero's sleeve.
And always, the work of clothing is intertwined with the work of survival. No one can make a coat alone, just as no one can bring down a mammoth single-handed. When you look around the camp at night, watching your friends and family bundled together, you know you've built something greater than the sum of its furs and hides. You've created a fabric of cooperation, trust, and shared skill.
You reflect on what you've learned. Group effort isn't just efficient, it's a matter of life and death. Clothing made by many hands is stronger, warmer, and more innovative than anything you could do alone. Every patch, stitch, and tie is a testament to the group's creativity and resilience. When the night falls, you snuggle into your communal clothing pile, a heap of blankets, furs, and patched wraps shared by those who need extra warmth. Someone cracks a joke about the first person to steal covers getting kicked out to sleep with the wolves. You laugh, you grumble, but you know the warmth of shared clothing is the warmth of shared life. The wind howls outside, sparks rise from the fire, lighting the circle of faces, old and young, clever and strong, all united by the thread of survival. You close your eyes, listening to the hum of conversation, the gentle sound of bone needles clicking through hide. Here in this little camp on the edge of a vast and wild world, you know you're safe, not because you're tough or clever or lucky, but because you're together. You drift off, wrapped in the work of many hands, dreaming of tomorrow's projects and the endless beautiful task of staying alive together. You wake with a start, the sound of laughter in your ears, and a stray feather poking out from your sleeve. At first you blink in confusion. Why are people in your group so animated before sunrise? Then you realize today, someone has uncovered an old stash of beads and shells. The morning is suddenly abuzz, the air thick with possibility. It's not just about surviving anymore. Now it's about standing out. Your clothing has become more than armor against the elements. It's your canvas, your story, and the world's earliest status update. It happens slowly at first. After weeks of patching, fitting, and reinforcing, the monotony of brown, grey, and tan hides begins to wear on the group's nerves. Someone, idly playing with a bone awl, threads a bit of red clay onto their tunic tie. A child finds a shiny shile at the riverbank and tucks it into a seam. You notice, then, that people are glancing at each other, checking out these new flourishes with a mix of envy and admiration. The first person to go all in is one of the teenagers, eager to show off a necklace of small, knotted reeds and beads made from bird bones. They strut around camp, swishing their cloak and tossing their head. "Nice try," someone jokes, "but I bet the mammoths aren't impressed." Still, within a day, everyone is raiding the group's meager stores of ornament, searching for anything shiny, colourful, or unique to add to their clothes. Soon, a new contest is born. Who can make the brightest, boldest, or most ingenious decoration? Some go for beads, small stones drilled with holes, strung on plant fibre or sinew, and sewn into the hem of a tunic or the fringe of a hood. Others pick shells, polished until they catch the firelight, and arrange them in patterns. You get in on the action, twisting long grass fibres and knotting them into a design that loops around your arm, part armlet, part conversation starter. It isn't long before the entire group is transformed, where once everyone looked more or less the same. Anonymous bundles of fur and hide. Now every person's clothing tells a story. That ochre stripe along the edge of your leggings, it's a mark of last winter's hardest journey. Those blue beads on your collar, traded with a neighboring group, proof that you know your way beyond your own camp. Someone wears a whole row of snail shells, loud, proud, and a little absurd, jingling with every step. You quickly realize that decoration isn't just about beauty. There's competition, of course, but also signaling status, skill, even identity. When you wear the shell necklace, everyone knows you spent a day at the river, braving the mud and biting insects. When you dye the edges of your tunic with a rare plant, people nod approvingly. Finding the dye plant took effort, and not everyone is willing to risk the thorns and stings. Your clothing becomes a resume, a record of your labor, cleverness, and the resources you command. Some of the group's elders at first grumble that all these decorations are a waste of time and thread, but they too soon warm to the idea. One day, you spot a respected hunter tying a row of wolf teeth around the neck of his cloak, a bold signal to anyone paying attention. Wolves are dangerous, he grins, but this one won't bite me anymore. It's half joke, half warning, and everyone gets the message. You learn the basics of ornament making through repetition and experimentation. Beads are made by patiently grinding stones or bones until they're smooth, then piercing them with a red-hot thorn or bone awl. Dyes are concocted from crushed berries, wild flowers, and even some types of clay. You discover that certain colors, like the bright reds and yellows, don't last long, fading in the sun or bleeding in the rain. Others, like earthy browns and muted greens, seem almost permanent, seeping deep into the hide. You start to favor those shades for anything you want to last, saving the rarer, brighter hues for special occasions. A few brave souls experiment with feathers. At first, they just tuck them into their headbands, but soon they're stitching feathers onto the shoulders of cloaks, the tips of hoods, and even the tops of shoes. It's not always practical. If you walk through the brush, half your feathers are left behind. But for gatherings, or on those long, dark winter nights when everyone huddles inside and needs a little color, they're a hit. And then there's the art of tattooing clothing. Not with needles and ink, you're not quite there yet, but with patterns burned or painted onto the hide. Someone uses a charred stick to draw zigzag lines around a sleeve cuff. Another traces spiral patterns with ochre, creating a design that almost glows in the firelight. The best designs are quickly copied, sometimes modified, and soon you can tell at a glance who made what and who was inspired by whom. Children are the boldest, treating clothing as a playground. They compete to see who can find the biggest feather, the brightest stone, the funniest shaped stick to tie to a belt. Sometimes they get it hilariously wrong. One child sews a huge snail shell to his hood, only to discover he can't lie down without a lump in the back of his head. The laughter is contagious, and the story gets retold every time someone mentions shellhead. As decorations multiply, clothing becomes a kind of communication. At a distance you can recognize your friends by the way their capes glint in the morning sun, or by the jingle of beads and shells. During group meetings or gatherings, people jockey for attention, positioning themselves so their best side is always on display. You realize you're witnessing the birth of personal style, long before anyone writes it down or posts about it online. But the significance of ornament goes deeper than showing off. Sometimes, you notice certain patterns only worn by people who have lost a family member. A line of dark beads, a splash of black clay, a feather worn upside down. These decorations become quiet signals of mourning, reminders that fashion is also about belonging and remembering. Other patterns, you suspect, are meant to attract or impress. Spiral motifs on the clothing of those who want to be noticed. Bold geometric lines for those who want to look strong and fierce. Trade between groups intensifies as the fashion arms race heats up. You see people bartering carefully carved beads for food or tools, swapping bright shells for the chance to learn a new dye recipe. Sometimes, strangers arrive with never-before-seen decorations, a row of bright blue stones, a cloak dyed a shimmering green, a tunic edged in animal teeth. There's always a surge of excitement, everyone eager to learn the new technique or to get their hands on the latest color. You notice that group identity emerges alongside individual expression. Certain decorations are worn only by your band. Maybe it's a particular arrangement of beads or a unique way of tying feathers at the collar. Other groups adopt their own symbols, and when you meet, you recognize each other instantly. The world is suddenly bigger, more interconnected, and much more colorful. There's a growing sense of ritual around clothing. Before a long hunt, you and your closest friends fasten on your best ornaments, maybe for luck, maybe for courage, maybe because it feels good to look your best when facing the unknown. When you return victorious, the celebrations include not just food and fire, but the swapping and gifting of new decorations. Children are given beads for their bravery, elders awarded shells or rare feathers in recognition of their wisdom. Sometimes, late at night, you find yourself fingering the beads along your tunic, remembering where each came from. A shell from a river you crossed in spring, a tooth from a wolf that stalked your camp, a bead carved by a friend who's now gone. Your clothing becomes a map of your life, a way to hold memory and meaning close to your skin. Even practical repairs get the decorative treatment. When you patch a tear, you reinforce the spot with a splash of color, a row of beads, or an extra feather. Soon, the best dressed are also the most repaired. The oldest members of the group become walking mosaics, their clothing a testament to years of hard living and creative problem solving. You notice that some people take on the unofficial role of fashion leader, those with a knack for design, or an eye for the right combination of materials. People seek them out for advice. How should I arrange these beads? Will this feather stay on if I run? You're flattered when others start asking you the same questions. You help tie knots, recommend colors, and sometimes just lend a steady hand to an excited child with big plans for a cape covered in moss and pebbles. Fashion, you realize, is as much about community as it is about self. The most beautiful designs are usually those created together. One person threading beads, another dyeing hide, a third tying feathers into place. You remember the long evenings spent around the fire, everyone focused on the same project, laughter rising as a particularly ambitious design goes hilariously wrong. Even mistakes become stories worth repeating. And there are always new challenges. Sometimes you experiment with dye and it stains your hands for days, or the colors run in the rain leaving muddy streaks across your tunic. Once you try a new bead arrangement, only to find it catches on everything, and you spend the day untangling yourself from the underbrush. Someone else tries to use fish scales for decoration. The result is dazzling, but the smell drives everyone away. The lessons are clear. In the world of Ice Age fashion, the best ideas are the ones you can actually live with. Despite the setbacks, the urge to decorate only grows stronger. In a world where so much is beyond your control, the weather, the hunt, the movement of the stars, fashion gives you a chance to assert yourself, to say, I am here, I belong, and this is who I am. It's an antidote to hardship, a source of joy, and a reminder that even in the most basic acts of survival, humans crave meaning and beauty. As another evening falls, and the group gathers around the fire, the glow picks out the colors and patterns of everyone's clothing. Some pieces shimmer, others glow faintly, and all bear the unmistakable marks of many hands and many stories. Someone tells a joke about starting the world's first fashion show, and everyone laughs, strutting and spinning in the firelight, showing off beads, shells, and feathers. You settle in, grateful for the warmth, the laughter, and the company. Your hands stray to the beads at your collar, and you smile, knowing that with every decoration, you're not just surviving, you're making history, one stitch, one bead, and one story at a time. Dawn breaks pale and gold. You wake to the clatter of bone needles and the soft thud of feet moving about camp. As you stretch, your patched cloak slips off one shoulder, and you're reminded for the 1000th time how easy it is for clothing to slide, tangle, or bite. You catch yourself fidgeting with the tie on your leggings, retying the knot for what feels like the 100th time. If clothing has become an invention and an art, it's also a daily battle with physics. Everyone is searching for that perfect solution, the shape that fits, the form that stays, the style that does more than just hang there. Today, you find yourself thinking about shape. You look around at your group and notice all the different ways people have tried to solve the "how do I keep this on" problem. Some have gone minimalist, a strip of fur or hide wrapped around the waist, held by a tight knot. Simple, effective, and easy to slip off if you need to run. Others layer their clothing, a draped pelt tied at the shoulder, another wrapped around the hips, plus a short cape or poncho against the wind. Each arrangement has its strengths and weaknesses, and every person has their own version of what works. What emerges over many failed experiments and accidental wardrobe malfunctions are the very first styles, the proto-outfits that will echo through millennia. You decide to try out some of these innovations for yourself. First up, the loincloth. The concept is basic. Take a strip of hide or strong plant fiber, loop it between your legs, and tie it around your waist. You're skeptical, but you have to admit it's practical. As you move through the day, crouching, climbing, running, the loincloth holds up surprisingly well. It's not the most glamorous piece of clothing, but it's easy to make, uses minimal material, and keeps the worst of the world at bay. You can almost see why it'll become the go-to for so many future humans from the Amazon to the Nile. Some in your group take loincloth design to the next level, adding fringes or colourful ties, or even layering two for extra coverage. You spot a friend sporting a particularly impressive double-knotted version, and when you compliment it, they beam with pride. No more accidental breezes, they laugh. Next, you test out the cape, a long strip of hide, often with the fur still on, thrown over the shoulders and fastened with a bone pin or tied thong. Capes are the unsung heroes of the Ice Age, easy to throw on or shrug off, warm and perfect for layering. But they have their issues. A strong gust of wind, a poorly tied knot, or a low-hanging branch can send your stylish outerwear flapping into the mud. Still, you notice that capes are endlessly adaptable. They become makeshift blankets at night, rain covers in a storm, even picnic mats for the lucky few who remember how to relax. There's also the wrap skirt, a broad rectangle of hide wrapped around the waist and tied or tucked at the hip. It's an upgrade from the loincloth if you want more warmth, a little dignity, and the option to loosen it when the sun gets too hot. The wrap skirt is quickly adopted by the camp's most fashion-forward, and you watch as new versions pop up. Double-layered for the cold, decorated with beads or painted with ochre for special occasions, cut short for agility or long for show. The evolution of sleeves is another breakthrough. Sleeveless wraps are quick and simple, but they leave arms exposed to sun, wind, and bugs. You attempt a short sleeve by sewing a smaller piece of hide to the shoulder of your tunic. The result is a bit lopsided, but at least it helps with sunburn and thorns. Before long, you and your group are in a creative arms race. Some go for capped sleeves, others experiment with detachable sleeves that tie on and off, and the boldest attempt full arm-length coverings, sometimes sewn tight, sometimes loose and bell-shaped. Every new style comes with challenges. Loincloths can chafe if the material is too rough, or if your knots are too tight. Capes snag on branches and blow away if not secured well. Wrap skirts have a mind of their own, especially when running or climbing. Sleeves restrict movement if sewn too tight, and flop uselessly if too loose. Each day brings another wardrobe malfunction, an accidental flash, a sudden gust, a sleeve that unravels mid-hunt. These disasters, though, are how you learn. When your skirt slips while climbing a rocky slope, you add a backup tie. When your cape blows away, you stitch a bone toggle to one corner and loop it through a slit at your collar. You create a belt out of braided grass for extra security, and your friends follow suit. The group's problem-solving becomes a running joke. Can your outfit survive a mammoth stampede? Can you still run from wolves in those shoes? Kids, of course, push the boundaries the farthest. They create their own wild fashions, combining loincloths and capes into superhero get-ups, layering wraps upon wraps, until they look like tiny waddling mountains of fur. Sometimes you see them tying two cloaks together to make a double-size blanket, or inventing games where whoever's outfit stays on the longest wins the day's best bone for carving. At night, the campfire is alive with chatter about the day's successes and failures. Someone stands up to show off their new design. A wrap that ties across the chest and under the arms for extra snugness, adorned with a handful of beads. Another shows off leggings that tie at both ankle and thigh, perfect for wading through thick grass. There's applause, a few gentle jokes, and always a promise to copy the best ideas tomorrow. You realize that style, even in the Stone Age, isn't just about looking good. It's about function, staying covered, staying warm, staying alive. But it's also about belonging. When you wear a wrap that matches your group's favorite color, or when you share a new way to fasten a cape, you're not just solving a problem, you're saying, I'm part of this, I belong. It's not all practical. As the weeks go by, you notice a slow drift toward embellishment for its own sake. Wraps get wider, capes longer, ties more elaborate. Decorative edges, stitched in contrasting thread or braided with colored grass, appear on hems and sleeves. Even the youngest children want to stand out. They ask for extra feathers, shells, or beads, and strut around as proud as little chieftains. Sometimes you find yourself gazing at your own reflection in a still pool, straightening your cloak, or tucking a shell behind your ear. There's pride there, not just in the work but in the way you carry yourself. You catch your friends doing the same, and when you tease them about it, they just grin. If you look good, you feel good, says one. Even if you still smell like old reindeer. There's an art to layering too. The best dressed in camp know that a good look isn't just about color or shape. It's about how each layer works with the next. An inner wrap for softness, a tunic for warmth, a skirt or loincloth for protection, and a cape for wind and rain. Some add a scarf or head wrap. Others invent belts from twisted plant fiber, adorned with bits of bone or shell. Each outfit is a small masterpiece, tweaked and tailored by many hands and much experience. You even experiment with seasonal style. As the weather shifts, you swap out heavy capes for lighter ones, ditch leggings for shorter wraps, and experiment with sun shields, a sort of prehistoric visor, wide bands of hide, tied around the head, decorated with feathers or grass. It's not just practical, it's playful. Summer is for lighter, airier garments. Winter for thick, padded layers that make everyone look twice as large. The styles spread beyond your group. When visitors arrive, you size each other up, admiring clever fastenings, unique dyes, new shapes. Sometimes you trade clothing, eager to try out a new design or to bring home a rare shell or bead. Every meeting is a miniature fashion show, and every show sparks a new round of innovation. You also see how clothing shapes social roles. Children wear simple wraps and capes, easy to take off when they're playing or bathing in the river. The oldest, often less mobile, favor longer, warmer garments, easy to layer and adjust without much fuss. Hunters wear tighter, less flappy outfits that won't snag or slow them down. Those who work with fire or sharp tools have thicker aprons or arm guards, extra protection stitched into every seam. Status, too, is on display. The best decorated, best made pieces often go to the most respected elders, skilled hunters, the best seamsters. Sometimes, clothing is given as a gift, a finely made cape for the new mother, a special beadwork belt for the child who braved the river crossing. The giving and receiving of clothing becomes a ritual, a moment of celebration and affirmation. With all this variety, you might expect envy or jealousy to creep in. And sometimes, yes, it does. When someone debuts a dazzling new look, others rush to copy it. When two children argue over the brightest shell, an elder steps in to help them make a trade. But more often, style inspires generosity. A new idea is quickly shared. A clever fastening is taught to anyone who asks. The camp's wardrobe is a living thing, ever-changing, always improved by many hands. As the seasons cycle and styles shift, you realize that fashion isn't just a frivolous extra, it's an essential part of life, woven as tightly into survival as hunting, fire-making, or shelter. Every style, the loincloth, the wrapped skirt, the cape, the sleeve, the head wrap, is a solution, an adaptation, a story. You drift off by the fire, your latest outfit snug and secure, the beads and shells clicking gently with each movement. You dream of new inventions, of brighter colors, of more comfortable fastenings. Somewhere in the future, people will laugh about fashion trends. For now, every trend is a tiny victory over the wild. And as you sleep, you know that, in your own way, you're not just following the first styles of history, you're making them. The air tonight carries the sharp promise of winter, crisper, meaner, with a bite that sinks right through your newest wrap. Even the bravest in your group huddle closer to the fire, capes and cloaks drawn tight, hands buried in makeshift mittens. It's nights like these you realize that truly test your ingenuity. You're not just competing with the cold anymore, you're up against the full force of an ice age. The wind howls, snow threatens, and everyone is on high alert. This is where clothing shifts from something you wear to the line between life and death. As the seasons change, you feel it in your bones. The furs, wraps and clever knots that were good enough last month now barely cut it. Your leggings freeze stiff if you leave them by the door overnight. The soles of your shoes turn brittle. The world shrinks to a small circle of warmth, and outside that circle, everything is hostile. You become obsessed with layering anything that might keep the chill at bay for just one more hour. Layering is no longer a fashion statement. It's your best defense. You start with a thin underlayer of soft rabbit fur or dry grass. Anything to keep the cold from biting straight through to your skin. Over that goes a tunic, then another wrap, then the thickest hide you can find. By the end you're swaddled in so many layers you move like a bundled beetle, arms sticking out, legs encased in padding. But it works. Every layer traps a little more heat, every fold of hide a bulwark against the wind. The group comes together to face the coming cold. Every evening you gather to patch old garments, make new ones, and trade secrets. The oldest among you teach the rest how to scrape hides until they're supple, then rub them with animal fat to keep out water. Someone invents a hood, a separate piece of hide, thick with fur, sewn or tied onto the cloak. The first time you wear it, you feel silly until the wind hits and your ears thank you. You become experts in the art of cold weather modification. Hoods, for one, are a revelation. They keep your head warm, and you quickly learn that an exposed scalp means you lose more heat than you can afford. The next innovation is the mitten. You and a friend try sewing two pieces of hide together, fur side in, leaving just enough room for your hands. The first versions are clumsy, impossible for delicate tasks, but they keep your fingers from freezing into claws. Soon, every pair of hands in camp has a set, some big and floppy, some snug and lined with moss, for extra warmth. You even develop a kind of proto-scarf, wrapping long strips of hide around your neck and face. Your own breath warms the air you inhale, and your skin stops cracking from the cold. The most fashion-forward invent an ear flaps, not for show, but because, after a few close calls with frostbite, you realize the value of covering every inch. With each passing week, your clothing evolves. You reinforce seams with extra lacing, patch every hole, and double up on the soles of your shoes. Someone figures out how to tie extra wraps around their legs. 2, 3, even 4 layers. You notice that those who invest the most time in their clothes fare best when the weather turns wild. They're the ones who come back from foraging trips with all their toes, the ones who can sit out on the frozen hillside without shivering. Hunting becomes an even bigger gamble. It's no longer just about skill or luck, it's about endurance. The further you stray from camp, the more the cold gnaws at you. Before a hunt, You suit up with every warm thing you own. Layered leggings, thick mittens, a fur hood, even a makeshift face mask. You move awkwardly, but you can last longer outside. Keep moving, keep searching for food. You learn to read the signs of cold damage. When someone comes back from a hunt with numb fingers or a pale, waxy patch on their skin, the whole group rallies. Warm water is rubbed in. Hands and feet are wrapped, and the offending garment is scrutinized for gaps. You forgot the second layer. Tie it tighter next time. There's no room for pride. Everyone's survival depends on everyone else's attention to detail. Sometimes you lose. A night storm blows up. Freezing rain pelts the camp, and the next morning, half your wraps are stiff as bark. You thaw them out by the fire, grumbling, but you also learn to plan ahead. Someone invents a drying rack. Long sticks propped over the coals, hides draped so the heat works through, but doesn't burn. Drying becomes an evening ritual, the smell of smoke and fur always in the air. Shoes are another battleground. When the ground freezes, the simplest foot wraps fall apart in hours. You experiment with multiple layers, inner grass or moss for insulation, then hide, then a rough sole made from bark or extra thick leather. You try wrapping strips around your ankles, then over the tops of your feet. You tie everything down with twisted sinew, praying it holds. Some in the group even stuff their shoes with spare fur, learning that every bit of air trapped inside is another shield against the ice. The cold teaches humility. Every shortcut, every skipped patch, every half-tied knot, every ignored hole becomes a regret. The youngest members learn this fastest, coming in shivering and swearing never to leave a seam unfinished. The elders, wrapped in layers upon layers, only nod and grunt, knowing the lessons by heart. Food and warmth go hand in hand. With every kill, nothing is wasted. Bones become needles and tools, sinew becomes thread, fat is rubbed into hides, fur is patched onto every garment. When an especially large animal is taken, the camp celebrates. Not just food for the belly, but fur for another set of mittens, a new cape, a desperately needed blanket. You watch as each person gets their share, then sits down to reinforce, stitch, and patch. The cold makes you more resourceful. You invent cloaks that double as sleeping bags, capes that can be fastened shut into tight, heat-trapping bundles. You and your group experiment with different cuts and fastenings, toggles made from bone, double-knotted ties, braided belts. Everyone becomes a tailor, an engineer, and a test subject. Every improvement is shared, every mistake a lesson for all. Your fires burn hotter, closer, and longer. You huddle together at night, sharing body heat and stories. The kids play games with their mittens, pretending to be bears or wolves, growling and tumbling over the furs. The adults trade stories of the worst winters past, the year when the snow never seemed to end, or when the river froze so hard you could walk for miles. Each tale ends the same way. But we made it. We figured it out. We survived. Occasionally, you glimpse another group moving across the valley, dark shapes, swaddled in fur, silhouettes against the snow. You wonder about their clothing, their tricks for keeping warm. Sometimes you meet, trade stories, compare mittens, and swap ideas. A new way to tie leggings, a trick for drying out shoes, a pattern for an extra snug hood. These are the treasures of the Ice Age, more precious than any jewel. The winters feel endless, but you adapt. The harshest days are endured by those who share, who help, who teach each other to patch, wrap, and layer. Some inventions even become tradition. The first day of true cold, the group gathers for a fashion check, making sure no one's cloak is full of holes, that every child has mittens, that every elder has a scarf. The laughter is genuine, but so is the care. Over time, you become almost proud of your cold weather ingenuity. Where once the world seemed out to get you, now you're equipped for anything. The wind still howls, the snow still falls, but you've learned how to fight back, not just with strength, but with cleverness, creativity, and a growing sense of community. You remember the first time you sat by the fire in your earliest, crudest wrap, shivering and miserable? Now, you watch the flames with calm, your body wrapped in a fortress of fur, hide, and ingenuity. You think about those who came before, who figured out the first hood, the first mitten, the first double-wrapped shoe. You realize you're part of a long line of survivors, each one adding a layer to the story, each one making life just a little warmer for those who come after. Winter, once a curse, becomes a kind of badge. I survived, you tell yourself, running your hands over your patched sleeves and double-layered leggings. We all survived, and tomorrow, when the snow falls again, you'll be ready. The cold creeps in, settling like a weight over your sleeping limbs. This time, it's not your hands or feet that ache the most, but your face, nose, cheeks, ears, all stinging, then numbing, then stinging again. By now you know, there's no toughing it out with the Ice Age wind. The group gathers around the morning fire, rubbing cheeks, cupping their faces, muttering about the biting air. Someone jokes that you should just bury your head in your tunic, and for a moment you consider it, but as you look around, it's clear, the age of head and neck coverings has truly arrived. You start with the simplest solution, a strip of hide tied under your chin, covering your ears and jaw. It works, sort of, but slips easily and leaves your forehead and nose exposed. The group's inventive energy turns to the problem with a familiar buzz. Everyone is cold. Everyone has an opinion. The eldest suggests tucking extra fur into your cloak and pulling it up over your ears. The youngest try tying strips of rabbit fur around their heads, ending up with comical tufts sticking out at odd angles. You soon notice, ears are the first to freeze, the first to sting, and if you're unlucky, the first to go numb and pale. Frostbite is not some distant threat. It's the most likely disaster of every cold snap. So you get serious. You shape a piece of fur to fit over the top of your head, cutting small holes for a chin tie. The first version sits awkwardly, sliding into your eyes or flopping down your back, but it's warm, and that's enough for now. With trial and error, the hoods get better. Some are made from a single thick hide, lined with the softest fur you can find. Others are patchwork, sewn from scraps of rabbit, fox, or even bird skins, pieced together for insulation. The hood starts simple, just a head covering tied beneath the chin, but soon people start adding flaps to cover ears, and padded bands to go across the brow. You invent ties that loop under your arms, or around the back of your head, keeping the hood in place even as you bend or run. A few of the most cautious among you go further, tying strips of hide across their cheeks and over their mouths, breathing through a mesh of woven grass or loose fur. It makes you look like you're trying to rob the world's most ancient bakery, but your face is safe from the wind. You learn that just a bit of warm breath trapped behind the fur can make all the difference. No more cracked lips or chapped noses. No more waking up with frost clinging to your eyelashes. Scarves come next. You twist long, thin pieces of hide or plant fiber into wraps you can loop around your neck, up over your chin, or even around your entire face if the wind is bad enough. Some prefer wide scarves, good for wrapping your head and neck together. Others use narrow, tightly woven bands as ear warmers. You see the most fashionable invent patterns, painting stripes or tying on beads, so their scarves stand out at the evening fire. The children are first to decorate their hoods, of course. One ties a row of feathers around the crown, another stitches beads along the ties, and before long the whole camp is a parade of prehistoric winter hats, some impressive, some ridiculous, all warmer than bare skin. There are competitions for the best hood, the brightest scarf, the funniest set of ear flaps, the best invention of the week, a fur muzzle for a friend's dog, who now sits proudly by the fire, ears cozy and tail wagging. You quickly realize this is survival, but it's also transformation. The face, once bare and vulnerable, becomes a place of ingenuity and pride. With every improvement, you venture further from the fire, into the wind, up the ridge, through blizzards that would have chased you home before. Now, Your head and neck are as protected as your feet and hands. You can watch the stars, scan for danger, or even nap in the open, knowing your ears won't freeze off by morning. You start seeing subtle differences in the way people move. No more hunched shoulders, no more frantic hands covering faces. Heads are lifted higher, laughter travels further. There's a sense of freedom, of being able to meet the world head on. Literally, the youngest children, no longer fussing about cold ears, invent new games of hide and seek in the snow, their brightly decorated hoods popping in and out of the drifts, like curious foxes. Your group perfects the art of the Ice Age, balaclava, fur hoods that extend into capes, scarves that tuck into tunics, even headbands that double as eye shields when the sun glints off the snow. Each person personalizes their gear, adjusting flaps, swapping linings, adding padding or decoration. You learn to recognize friends from a distance just by the cut of their hood or the twist of their scarf. Winter becomes a little less cruel. The oldest can join evening gatherings without fear, cheeks rosy instead of raw. You invent jokes about the long-eared and the double-scarved stories, about legendary hoods that turned away blizzards, and myths about the first person to sleep outside all night and wake up with their nose still attached. There are still hard lessons, nights when you wake to a burning cold in your cheek, mornings when a careless friend has lost their hood and comes to you for help, nose white and numb, but the group responds with care and urgency, warming hands, checking for frostbite, and quickly fashioning new hoods from spare scraps. The rhythm of patch, repair, reinforce never ends, but now your arsenal is full of proven tricks and communal knowledge. Over time, the hood and scarf become more than just survival gear. They are tokens of affection, gifts at rites of passage, symbols of the cleverness and resilience of your people. A child's first hood, carefully sewn by a parent or grandparent, is worn with pride and often decorated with charms to ward off misfortune. An elder's battered but thick scarf is admired, not only for its warmth but for the story of winters it has survived. You realize you've joined a long line of humans who have looked at the world's hardest problems. How to stay alive, how to care for one another, and met them with the tools at hand, inventing solutions with every scrap of hide and bit of bone. The face, once a weak point, is now a badge of innovation. The head and neck, once so exposed, are now safe, warm, and thanks to a bit of colour and pattern, unmistakably yours. The winter winds will still come, but you face them with your chin high, your scarf knotted tight, and your story stitched all around your face. Sunrise cracks across the horizon, painting streaks of gold and blue on the frost-silvered grass. You rise stiffly, your legs still bundled in last night's patched leggings, your feet swaddled in the now familiar embrace of moss-stuffed hide shoes. The air tastes of wood smoke and distant promise. A new day, another chance to test just how much farther, faster and bolder you can go now that clothing is not just a shield, but a tool. As you move, you barely notice the flex of your feet, the snug grip of your tunic, the gentle rustle of beads against your throat. For you and for all your group, clothing has become an extension of the self. You may not be the first to wear it, but you are among the first to live in it. You start the morning with a ritual that has, without anyone quite realizing it, become the heartbeat of daily life, the communal clothing check. As each person emerges from the warmth of furs and fires, there's a quick scan. Are shoes intact? Are wraps secure? Did the youngest lose a mitten or drag a sleeve through the ashes again? Everyone checks each other's seams and ties, sometimes gently mocking, sometimes giving a proud nod of approval. The group is your mirror, and their laughter and suggestions help you see what you might miss alone. This ritual extends into other tasks. If someone needs help tightening a belt, fixing a ripped sleeve, or choosing which hood to wear, they simply ask. No one hesitates. Clothing has made you interdependent. Everyone's comfort and survival now rests on the shared wisdom, patience, and hands of many. The child with the keenest eyes spots loose stitches. The teenager with the deftest fingers ties knots that hold through anything. The elders, with a memory for every failed patch and every clever fix. Pass on tricks for reinforcing the knees, insulating the soles, softening a stiff new hide. Each day's clothing carries the touch of all who care for you. After breakfast, as the camp stirs to full activity, the impact of this evolution is everywhere. The youngest dart around in capes, sewn short and light, dodging the older children who chase them through the grass. Adults gather in knots, some patching old garments, others designing new. One group sits in the sun, threading beads onto thongs and chatting about the next great hunt. Another cluster near the river, washing last night's muddy leggings and gossiping about whose shoes lasted longest through the rain. The boundaries of your world are changing too. Now, your group roams farther from camp, across rocky hills, into dense woods, along riverbanks and meadows once avoided for their rough footing or biting insects. The map in your mind grows broader, trails weaving outward in all directions. You are bolder, more willing to risk a journey, to explore a new patch of forest or a distant ridge, because you know your clothes will protect you from most of what the world can throw your way. The effects ripple through every part of life. Foraging expeditions last longer, netting more roots, berries and edible shoots than ever before. The hunters track animals deeper into the hills, outpacing prey not just with speed, but with endurance. When a sudden storm rolls through, you know how to wrap up, layer down and keep the worst of the weather at bay. Even the youngest join in, with their feet covered and bodies insulated. They can walk farther and play longer, making them eager helpers and future explorers in training. Footwear, especially, becomes a source of pride and innovation. Each new material you discover, thick bark for soles, softer mosses for padding, sinew for extra strong ties, becomes a reason for excitement. There are jokes about who has the fastest shoes, the quietest shoes, the shiniest shoes. When someone invents a double-layered boot with a watertight seal, they're treated like a hero. Soon everyone wants to copy the design. You experiment with dyes and paints. Splashing shoes use colors that set you apart. Children invent games where the winner gets their shoes decorated by the whole camp, a swirling riot of stripes, dots and animal shapes. But it isn't just the young who find new freedom. The elders, some of whom had stopped walking far from camp years ago, begin to venture out again, with thick-soled shoes and layered leggings. They can visit distant relatives, search for new herbs, or just enjoy the long walks they'd missed. Their confidence grows, and with it, their place in the community is renewed. When they return with a bundle of rare leaves or a story from an old friend, everyone gathers to listen and learn. As you look around, you notice how clothing marks the rhythm of life's big events. New shoes for a first hunt, a decorated hood for a birthday, a feathered cloak given as a sign of thanks. The group invents rituals when a child walks their first long journey. They are carried home on shoulders and gifted a special patch for their shoes. When a garment finally wears out after many seasons, it is given a small farewell, its best pieces saved for new projects, its memory woven into jokes and stories. Work changes too. In the past, a long walk meant a day of sore feet, torn skin, or cold so deep it made you weep. Now, journeys are measured by the stories you tell along the way. Each stop is a chance to fix a tie, retie a shoe, share a bite to eat, or a memory of the path behind you. When someone stumbles, there are hands ready to help, sometimes fixing a shoe, sometimes just offering a word of encouragement. Even food gathering is transformed. You move confidently through thorny brambles and wet meadows, knowing that your leggings and boots can take the punishment. The berry boots, invented after one too many muddy soaks, become a sensation, waterproof, high-topped, and decorated with green paint and little pebbles. Everyone wants a pair, and the next berry harvest is the biggest anyone can remember. On cold evenings, as the fires burn bright, you gather for the great shoe-off, a night where everyone displays their latest repairs, inventions, and decorations. There is laughter and applause, small prizes of beads or nuts, and stories told about the journeys those shoes have survived. The children put on a play using mismatched shoes as puppets, making everyone roar with laughter. The oldest members nod and smile, remembering their own first steps in crude wraps, and marvel at how far everyone has come. But even as routine sets in, clothing remains an evolving art. New challenges appear: rain that soaks through every seam, summer heat that makes thick fur unbearable, icy mornings that demand another layer or a new kind of mitten. You experiment constantly. Some try weaving grass sandals for the hottest months. Others add pockets for gathering seeds and nuts. Someone invents a quick-drying hood, perfect for surprise storms. Each new idea is tried, tested, tweaked, and improved. Or if it fails, at least provides a new tale to share. The smallest repairs, too, become small acts of love. You notice how a parent checks a child's shoes before bed, tucking moss between the toes. Friends trade patches and beads, sharing bits of luck and memory. An elder quietly stitches a broken thong while the camp sleeps, leaving it ready for the child who lost it the day before. Every stitch and patch is a thread tying you together, holding your little world in place. Travel grows safer. You take longer journeys, knowing you can rely on your gear. Sometimes you join up with other groups, marveling at their different designs, trading tricks and materials. There's a feeling of shared progress, a sense that everyone is part of something larger, the ancient and ever-changing craft of staying warm, dry, and mobile. There are setbacks, of course. A particularly wet season rots half the camp's shoes, and you spend nights by the fire, drying, repairing, and inventing new ways to waterproof soles. Someone's foot gets infected after a thorn breaks through, and the lesson is harsh, a reminder that vigilance matters. You start carrying small bundles of healing herbs in your shoe pouches, ready for emergencies, and you teach the children to respect their feet, to care for their shoes, to always carry spares. As the months slip into years, you look back on the first crude wraps and furs you wore. Now your clothes are layered, fitted, and yes, beautiful, stitched with color and memory. Tested by storms and sun, you see the children running, elders walking, the whole group gathered around the evening fire, shoes lined up to dry, leggings patched and painted. It's not just comfort or survival anymore. It's culture, it's story, it's your shared invention, walking on into tomorrow. Morning brings a hush, the world veiled in drifting mist. As you push aside the edge of your hide shelter, you hear it, a distant call. Then the answering shout of another group on the move. Your own camp stirs, people blinking, stretching, checking their wraps and shoes before stepping into the dew-soaked grass. Today you're reminded that you are not alone on this landscape. There are others out there, bands just like yours, braving the cold, the wild, and the daily challenges of clothing and survival. The meeting of different groups is no rare occurrence. This land is a crossroads, and sometimes so are your inventions. Encounters start with curiosity and caution. You recognize other groups by their silhouettes, shapes and colors of clothing, distinctive hoods, beads that catch the morning light. Sometimes, long before you hear a word, you notice a splash of ochre or a row of shells, the signature of a people who live to the south or west, or some valley you haven't seen in years. In this way, clothing becomes the earliest language, a flag, a signal, a way to say here we are, and this is who we are. Your first feeling at a meeting is often relief. There's a quiet joy in knowing you're not the only ones who've battled freezing winds and muddy rivers. You eye their shoes and capes, noting repairs, different styles, clever flourishes. You marvel at how necessity breeds endless variation. One group favors leggings with the fur outside for water shedding. Another layers soft inner wraps with tightly woven grass on the surface. Someone's cloak is painted with spirals in clay pigment. Another's shoes are decorated with rows of tiny river stones. Exchanges begin with laughter, surprise, and compliments. Those beads, where did you find that color? What's that wrapping there on the shoulders? There's a sense of kinship, and quickly, the chatter turns to trading. It's rarely just food or tools. Most eagerly, people swap stories and solutions. Let me show you how we tie this knot. It never slips. You must try this moss for lining boots. Someone proudly displays a new awl, shaped from antler, which punches holes more easily through thick hide. You offer a patch of waterproofed bark, trading tips on how best to tie it in without blisters. The young ones circle each other shyly at first, peeking at unusual shoes, tugging the edges of hoods, fingering unfamiliar beads. Then, with the confidence only children have, they compare gear, swapping moss, feathers, even entire shoes for a few hours, to try out new ideas. In no time, they're running together, inventing games based on the wildest differences. Who can make the loudest shoe, or whose cape catches the most wind? Adults and elders, meanwhile, gather in the center, inspecting each other's handiwork with practiced eyes. Here, the talk grows more serious. What do you use for waterproofing? How long does this last before it tears? Each answer is a gift. Each new trick a valuable prize. Someone demonstrates double thread stitching, while another group reveals how they soften stiff hide with a particular plant root, and hours of patient pounding. Fashion isn't just about function anymore. Now it's also about inspiration. A visitor's intricately woven belt sparks a round of admiration, and you quickly find yourself learning the over-under pattern, fingers fumbling but eager. Someone else brings a dye you've never seen before. Deep blue, almost like the twilight sky. They explain through pantomime and laughter how they grind and soak a certain mineral found in their valley, mixing it with fat to fix the color in the hide. You're already planning a visit to those distant cliffs to find the stone for yourself. Trade flows quickly. Sometimes it's direct barter, sometimes a gift given, and another offered days later. Most of the time, it's skills and secrets that pass hands, not objects. You return to camp with a new way to line shoes, a trick for knotting leggings that doesn't slip, a pattern for reinforcing mittens. The next week, half your group has tried a new style, eager to show off what they learned from your new friends. Rituals and celebration blossom in these meetings. At the close of a successful exchange, there's often a shared meal, a round of dancing or singing. Clothing is central to the fun. People parade their best capes, beads, and hats, sometimes switching gear for a night just for the laughter. Children pile on layer after layer, emerging as waddling, multicolored creatures. The elders, normally so serious, pose with new hats or belts, everyone roaring with delight at the spectacle. Stories become the richest currency. Last winter, my shoes froze so hard, I had to thaw them with hot stones. Let me show you the new wrap I invented for nights like that. Once, I lost my hood to a hungry wolf, so now I always tie it with a double loop. Here, watch. These tales of struggle, disaster, and triumph become as important as the garments themselves. You begin to realize that knowledge about clothing, about life, is what your ancestors have always traded most. With each new encounter, your camp's wardrobe becomes a record of faraway places. A blue bead from the river people, a feather from the mountain band, a fur patch with a rare twist of yellow dye. Your clothing isn't just your invention anymore. It's a collaboration, a history of every meeting, every lesson, every friend and rival across the land. Some meetings bring more than tips and trinkets. You notice new partnerships forming. A young woman joins your band, bringing her favorite sewing technique. A hunter from another group marries into yours, his leggings always bearing the style of his childhood valley. With every union, clothing styles merge and shift, creating hybrid spiral-painted leggings with double-stitched seams, capes edged in 2 colors of beadwork, mittens that bear both your signature knot and theirs. Not all exchanges are easy. Sometimes you're wary. Did that group take more than they gave? Is their secret really better than yours? A little tension is inevitable, but you find that sharing is the rule, not the exception. The harsh world outside encourages generosity. No one wants to see a neighbor freeze or limp, and every new idea strengthens all. These encounters even change the way you think about time. Before we met the mountain people, we never wore our furs inside out for rain. It was after the river band's visit, but we started adding clay beads to our shoe ties. Your own group's history becomes woven into every garment, every new experiment or adopted tradition a signpost of who you've met and what you've learned. As the years pass, these meetings and exchanges become milestones. You remember the first time you tried a new knot, the pride of returning from a distant camp with a fresh design, the laughter when someone's new rain hat turned out to be better at collecting water than shedding it. Each memory is attached to a piece of clothing, each patch or decoration a link to a wider world. Your relationship with clothing evolves further. Where once you focused on patching holes and keeping dry, now you plan ahead, gathering rare dyes for the next big gathering, practicing new stitches, inventing ways to store beads and shells for easy trading. You even find yourself dreaming of new colors, new patterns, new tricks to try the next time another group visits. Fashion becomes not just survival, not just beauty, but anticipation. What will the next meeting bring? Children, especially, become ambassadors of innovation. They're the first to swap shoes, the first to wear the wildest combinations, the first to brag about whose mitten was inspired by the people with the grass hats. They soak up every trick, then forget half, and invent new ones as they run wild in their own creations. Sometimes, the exchanges take on deeper meaning. A gifted cloak is not just a trade, but a symbol of peace or friendship. A bead, pressed into a new friend's hand, is a promise to return, to share more next season. When you see your own group's patterns or colors on a visitor months later, there's a thrill, a sign that your invention, your art, your way of life is traveling outward, living on in distant places. You begin to keep an eye on the horizon, waiting for the next visitors, the next chance to learn, to teach, to swap another secret. Clothing, once a solitary solution to the bite of the wind, has become a thread running across the land, binding you not only to your own people, but to everyone bold and clever enough to survive. At day's end, you return to your fire, your head full of ideas, your hands already itching to try new stitches, new knots, new decorations. You know that with each meeting, each exchange, your world gets bigger, warmer, more beautiful, and your story is stitched tighter to the story of all who came before, and all who are yet to come. The days roll on, and the story of clothing grows richer, more than animal skin, more than knots and sinew, more even than the sum of every patch and bead. Now it's about memory. As another year begins to turn, you become the keeper of stories, each thread on your sleeve a reminder of where you have been, who you have loved, and what you have learned. Clothing is now not just armor or art, it is history, legacy, and a family's living record. It begins in the smallest ways. One morning, a child refuses to throw away a tattered old mitten. This one, they insist, kept me warm in the storm. Their parent shrugs and patches it again, even as a new pair waits by the fire. You find yourself doing the same, repairing leggings that are mostly patch, not for function but for memory, because those scraps once belonged to someone who taught you how to tie your first shoe, or who gave you your first bead. This sense of attachment deepens over time. You notice it during winter gatherings, when the group huddles together to tell stories and pass the long hours of darkness. Children snuggle into cloaks and wraps that once belonged to older siblings, cousins, even distant relatives whose names now echo in song. An elder's cloak is held together by a line of beads, each one added after a long journey or the birth of a child. At every fire, you touch the fringe of your own cape, and remember that bright blue bead from the first trade with the river people, that patched spot where you tore the hem climbing a frozen tree. There's a quiet reverence as you hand down clothing. It is never simply given. It is gifted, with a story attached. When a girl outgrows her first pair of shoes, she gives them to her little brother, sitting with him by the fire, pointing to each mark and patch. This spot, I made that running through the mud. Here, this knot, my friend tied it for me after I fell. The boy listens, awed, then tries the shoes on, promising to keep them safe. It isn't just an object he's receiving, but a piece of his family's journey, a badge of belonging. Your camp invents small rituals around these gifts. Sometimes it's just a whispered blessing, a thumb pressed to a patch or bead, a hope for safety and luck. Other times there's a gathering songs, laughter, a retelling of the garment's adventures. You see tears when an elder passes on a favourite cloak, smiles when a child, shy and proud, dons a too big tunic for the first time. The youngest are woven into the fabric of memory, dressed in the echoes of those who came before. Some pieces become legendary. There's the famous torn leggings, passed down for so long that no one remembers who wore them first, but everyone remembers the time they were mended with 5 colours of thread after a wild chase through brambles. The fire shoes patched with soot-black hide after surviving a night trapped outside in a snowstorm. The wedding cape worn by 3 generations at celebrations, each time with a new feather or bead added to the collar. Your group's history is worn on your bodies. The story's never written down, but remembered every time someone asks, "Where did you get that patch?" The oldest members carry the most elaborate records. You see their cloaks heavy with beads, fringed with coloured knots, decorated with bits of antler, shell, or even a shiny flake of stone. They're walking archives, each stitch a memory, every patch a lesson. Children gather at their feet to hear the tales. How this sleeve came from a mammoth hunt, how this bead was traded during a famine, how this scarf was the last thing made by a beloved friend before they travelled to a far valley. In this way, clothing becomes the first library stories wrapped close to the heart, accessible at any moment, always growing. You find that, over time, even your mistakes are preserved. The mitten with a lopsided seam becomes a funny story, a favourite piece to show off. The cloak with mismatched patches turns into a game. Who can name every patch and where it came from? Every failed invention, like the time you tried to waterproof a shoe with sticky sap, only to glue your toes together, becomes a tale to make the youngest laugh. Your garments become more than function. They're a living, breathing family album. As you grow older, you feel the weight of this legacy. When you prepare a gift of clothing, a new hood for a grandchild, a carefully patched pair of leggings for a friend, you take extra care. You choose the softest fur, the sturdiest hide, the most beautiful beads. You stitch in small details. A mark here, a hidden knot there, little reminders of what you hope for, little wishes for luck, health, happiness. Each piece you give away is a promise. May this serve you well. May it remind you of me. The landscape outside your camp changes with every season, but inside, memory is what binds you all together. As the wind howls and snow piles up outside, the group draws closer. Stories flow as freely as hot soup, laughter mixes with tears. You realize that, long after a piece of clothing is gone, worn to rags, burned by accident, lost to the river, the stories remain, stitched into everyone's minds. When a song is sung or a joke retold, the memory of a beloved wrap or shoe flickers back, warming the group in ways no fire ever could. The meaning of clothing extends even further out into the world, into relationships with neighbouring bands. When visitors arrive, you know them instantly by the patterns and patches they wear, just as they know you. Some memories are exchanged as stories, others as objects. A bead, a scrap of coloured fur, a cleverly knotted thong. The gifts carry stories with them, so even when the visitor is gone, a part of their journey remains with you. At great gatherings, rare but joyous, bands trade garments, tales and blessings. You watch as people search for old friends in the crowd, recognizing each other by the oldest patches or the rarest beads. When groups split or join, when people marry or travel, the exchange of clothing becomes a rite, a sign of unity and shared fortune. Sometimes the most precious gifts aren't food or tools, but a patch from a mother's cloak, a bead from a father's leggings, a strip of painted hide carried since childhood. You notice too that the way you talk about clothing has changed. No longer just mine or yours, but ours. Our cloak, our story, our colours. A lost mitten is everyone's loss. A new patch is everyone's pride. When a member of the group passes away, Their clothing is divided, not with sorrow, but with reverence and love. Each person receives a scrap or bead to sew onto their own garments, carrying the memory forward. The departed live on, not just in spirit, but in the seams and stitches that crisscross the camp. Even strangers who join your group are welcomed by the sharing of memory. They're gifted a patch or a bead, invited to add their own stories, to become part of the living tapestry. Over time, their own patterns blend with yours. Children grow up in a patchwork world where every piece of clothing is a mosaic of many lives, many places, many dreams. In quiet moments, you reflect on what has changed. The endless struggle for warmth, the daily battle with the wild, hasn't vanished, but it feels different now. Clothing, patched and repatched, doesn't just keep out the cold. It carries hope, strength, and belonging. It's a flag for your band, a shield against loneliness, a celebration of everyone who has ever sat by your fire, walked beside you, held your hand in the dark. As the fire burns low, you look at your hands, scarred from stitching, toughened by work. You touch the beads and patches on your cloak, recalling every face, every laugh, every lesson. You smile, knowing that even when you're gone, these threads will hold, these stories will last, these little acts of love and memory will keep the cold at bay for generations yet unborn. And so, as the wind sighs through the camp and another night settles over the land, you wrap yourself in your living history, your story, your family, your people. You sleep, not just warm, but remembered. A hush settles over your camp as the final embers fade to a gentle glow. You lie back, watching a dark sky glitter with unfamiliar constellations, patterns that meant nothing to your ancestors, but that you name and remember, just as you've learned to name and remember every patch and bead on your cloak. It's the end of another season, and tonight you feel the weight and wonder of what your group has become. Clothing, that humble human invention, is not just something you put on. It is something you pass on, a living thread between past, present, and future. Tonight you catch the soft shuffle of feet as people settle in, the gentle cough of a grandparent, the shush of a parent soothing a restless child. The air inside the camp is heavy with warmth, much of it from shared furs and capes, all of it from shared effort. Someone is telling stories in the corner, their voice a low rhythmic chant that blends into the soft wind outside. It's a comfort to everyone, a way of lulling children and more than a few adults into a peaceful slumber. You find your mind drifting through time. How far you've come, not just in distance, but in understanding and skill. The first awkward days of wrapping hides and tying knots feel like a distant memory, a myth told by elders to make the children laugh. Yet you remember the sting of wind against bare skin, the fear that a single ripped seam could mean misery, or worse. You remember how each small success, an improved tie, a warmer mitten, a shoe that survived the river, brought not just relief, but joy. The earliest inventions were simple, but they were breakthroughs. The first time you used moss in a shoe or made a hood for a child, you felt clever and powerful, as if you'd changed the world in some small but real way. You have changed the world, with every layer, every stitch, every patch and knot. You and your group have made your own survival more likely, your own nights more comfortable. But more than that, you've given shape to something deeper, an identity, a community, a sense of purpose and connection that runs through everyone you love. Clothing, at its heart, is no longer just a tool or a trick. It is your culture, your shared work, your mark on the earth. Now, as you drift among your sleeping family, you hear the quiet whisper of tradition. A child clutches a beaded mitten, murmuring the story of its patches. An elder, wrapped in a patchwork cloak, dreams of the fire shoes she wore as a girl, and the face is now gone, but remembered in every thread. There's pride in this, the knowledge that your small inventive act have become a legacy, something that will live beyond you, as long as there are hands to tie knots and hearts to remember. The seasons are still harsh. Rain comes, and you invent new ways to waterproof. The sun beats down, and you find lighter colors, cooler wraps, smarter ways to cover your head. Frost returns, and with it, new combinations of layers, shared tricks and fixes, a renewed sense of vigilance. Children grow, and you measure them for new leggings, letting them choose the beads or colors that mark their steps. Elders age, and you honor them with gifts of warmth and beauty, making sure their stories are sewn into the very seams they wear. Over time, new materials enter your world. Trade brings distant treasures, shells from the coast, feathers from the deep forest, strange new fibers from faraway travelers. Every addition is welcomed and adapted, stitched into your old traditions. You see how the story of clothing never ends, but keeps unfolding, how invention and memory feed each other, making you stronger, more connected, more alive. Even the animals whose hides you use are honored. Songs are sung for the reindeer, the wolf, the hare, the bison. Thanks given for the warmth and life their bodies offer. When you tan a hide, you remember to leave a mark or offer a prayer, gratitude woven as tightly as any seam. At great gatherings, your people's clothing is admired, traded, sometimes even copied. But you notice that the deepest admiration is not for the flashiest bead or the brightest color, but for the oldest patch, the best repair, the story everyone knows. A cloak that has crossed 5 rivers and survived 10 winters is worth more than any single piece of fur or shell. The true richness of your wardrobe is in the years it holds, the lives it represents. You think, sometimes, of what will come after you. Will there be new ways to tie a knot, new colors to try, new stories to attach to a mitten or a shoe? Will future generations look at your old cloak and know, from the pattern of its patches and the line of its stitches, what you faced and overcame? You hope so. You suspect they will. For that is what clothing has become. A message, a map, a testament, not just to survival but to ingenuity and love. You settle into your furs, the warmth deep and even. You know your children, your friends, and all the sleepers around you are safe tonight. Not just because of your skill with a needle or your cleverness with a knot, but because of your willingness to share, to teach, to pass on what you've learned. The stars shift above you. The night grows quieter, softer. Your thoughts blur into dreams, woven with images of laughter, invention, and the endless gentle work of hands on hide, thread through bone, color and story joined forever. And so, timeless sleep sapiens, your journey through the invention of clothing has become more than a history lesson. It is a lullaby of survival, creativity, and connection. You are not just dressed for the cold. You are dressed in memory, in meaning, in the living warmth of those who came before you and those who will follow. Now, as you slip further into sleep, let everything slow down. Imagine the soft, weighty comfort of your cloak drawn snug around your shoulders. The gentle hush of the campfire's last glow flickers across the tent walls, and all around you, people are settling, shifting, drifting into their own slow-breathing dreams. Outside, the world is silent, a great vast plain stretching beneath a sky powdered with stars, each one a gentle witness to your journey, each one as old as the first thread wound through hide. Your body feels heavy, safe. The worries of the day, the sharpness of the cold, the sting of a missed stitch, the laughter at a lopsided mitten, all fade into the background, softened by the rhythms of breath and the quiet chorus of those sleeping nearby. Even the night air, brisk and clean, feels gentle as it tugs at the edge of your fur. You know deep in your bones that you have what you need: warmth, shelter, the careful handiwork of many hands, and the quiet company of friends. Let your thoughts wander now, slowly, like smoke curling from the last log on the fire. Picture the faces of your group, children curled up in their favorite capes, elders dreaming beneath patchwork cloaks, each person wrapped in layers of story and memory. Feel the weight of your clothing, the gentle roughness of the seams, the softness of fur, or the smooth coolness of beads at your throat. Every thread is a lullaby, every patch a promise that you are safe, held, remembered. In this ancient world, with nothing but the simplest tools and the oldest human wisdom, you and your people have made something beautiful, something that lasts, that comforts, that endures beyond fear or hunger or cold. Tonight, let sleep carry you deeper, warm and unhurried. Know that you are home, wherever you wander, whatever you face. Your story is stitched safely into the fabric of time. You are wrapped in the quiet courage and gentle creativity of all who came before, and the dawn will bring a new day for your hands, your heart, and the clothes that keep you whole.